Amid the dense fog of remote mountains, beneath glaciers that shift without warning, and within forests so silent that every crack of a branch echoes like a warning, search and rescue teams have vanished in the line of duty, leaving only whispers of their fate. In some cases, helicopters plummeted into icy ravines. In others, entire crews disappeared amid crevassed glaciers or roaring flash floods. Each mission began with purpose, a call to aid those in peril, but ended with mysteries that defy explanation. Step carefully along jagged Himalayan peaks, through icy Siberian gorges, and into shadowed forests in Japan, feeling the tension of every creaking rope and the chill of hidden ice. Witness cryptic traces left behind, hear the silence that follows disaster, and sense the inexplicable forces that turn courage into tragedy, drawing you closer to the questions that remain unanswered. The Dyatlov Pass Recovery Team, Ural Mountains, Russia. Wind scoured the northern slopes of the Ural Mountains with a force that erased tracks within minutes, leaving behind only hard-packed snow and a silence that felt absolute. In February 1959, that silence settled over a stretch of high ground later named Dyatlov Pass, after the leader of a missing hiking party from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. The disappearance of Igor Dyatlov and 8 fellow trekkers triggered one of the most extensive search efforts in the Sverdlovsk region, drawing students, local volunteers and military personnel into terrain known for sudden storms and lethal cold. Weeks later, some of the very men tasked with recovering the dead would themselves perish in the same unforgiving mountains. Concern first arose when the hikers failed to send a promised telegram upon settling Vizhai, their final planned stop before returning to Sverdlovsk. Families contacted authorities, and on February 20th, organised search teams began combing the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, a Mansi name often translated as Mountain of the Dead. The initial search party consisted largely of fellow students and instructors, familiar with winter trekking, supported by aircraft and soldiers once the scale of the disappearance became clear. Temperatures in the region routinely fell below -30°C, and winds along the exposed ridgelines could reach gale force, complicating every movement. The tent was found first, half buried and torn open from the inside, its fabric slashed as though the occupants had fled in urgent panic. Boots, coats, and personal belongings remained neatly arranged inside, a detail noted in official reports that would later disturb investigators. Searchers followed a line of footprints leading down slope toward a patch of sparse forest nearly a mile away. There, beneath a cedar tree with broken branches up to several meters high, the first 2 bodies were discovered dressed only in underwear and socks, their skin marked by frostbite and superficial abrasions consistent with exposure. As more volunteers arrived, the search intensified, and Dyatlov himself was found lying on his back between the cedar and the tent, positioned as if attempting to crawl uphill. Several others were located along the same line, suggesting a desperate effort to return to shelter. Autopsies conducted in Sverdlovsk listed hypothermia as the cause of death for most of the victims, though some displayed injuries that would later fuel decades of speculation. It was during these recovery efforts, conducted in blinding snow and shifting wind, that additional fatalities began to shadow the operation. Among those assisting were members of local search brigades who had volunteered repeatedly in the region's winter emergencies. One such man, identified in archival records as a participant in the February operations, later died in the mountains during a subsequent search mission under conditions that mirrored the original disaster. His death was officially attributed to exposure after becoming separated from his group in heavy snowfall, yet the terrain in which he was found was considered manageable by experienced rescuers. The incident deepened an already growing unease among volunteers who had walked the same ridges where Dyatlov's group had fallen. Military personnel also played a visible role in the later stages of recovery, especially when 4 of the hikers remained unaccounted for beneath deep snow. In May 1959, those final bodies were located in a ravine under several meters of compacted drift, discovered by probing poles and systematic excavation. 2 of them suffered severe chest fractures, while another displayed a catastrophic skull injury, injuries described by a Soviet forensic expert as comparable to those caused by a powerful force, though without external wounds. Radiation was detected on some clothing items, a fact confirmed in the official case files, though its origin was never conclusively explained. The presence of radiation prompted involvement from additional authorities, including specialists tasked with measuring contamination levels in the area. Some search participants later reported unusual sensations, including skin irritation and persistent headaches, though medical documentation remained sparse. A few rescuers who spent extended periods near the tent site and ravine reportedly experienced deteriorating health in the years that followed, though official investigations did not formally connect their conditions to the operation. Within the rigid structure of the late Soviet state, information was often compartmentalized, and the final report on the Dyatlov case concluded only that an unknown compelling force had caused the hikers' deaths. The region itself carried a reputation that predated 1959. Kholat-Syakhl and the surrounding passes were known among the indigenous Mansi people as remote and spiritually charged, though there is no verified evidence linking local traditions to the tragedy. What is documented is the extreme volatility of the mountain weather, where katabatic winds can descend abruptly from higher elevations, creating sudden pressure shifts and whiteout conditions. Some modern researchers have proposed that a rare slab avalanche or wind-driven snow event may have forced the hikers from their tent, yet no large avalanche debris was recorded by the first search teams on site. For the rescuers, the environment remained the most immediate threat. Search logs describe nights spent in improvised shelters, with stoves struggling to function in high winds and frost forming inside canvas tents. Visibility could drop to mere meters within minutes, and landmarks vanished beneath drifting snow. It was during one such later mission, according to regional accounts, that a member of a search contingent failed to return from a reconnaissance sweep, his body found days later in a shallow depression, partially covered by new snowfall. Official statements framed the death as an unfortunate accident in hazardous terrain. Yet patterns lingered in the details. The rescuers who died did so not in reckless conditions, but during structured operations led by individuals familiar with winter survival. Their routes were mapped, their timelines recorded, and still the mountains claimed them in ways that echoed the original disaster. Soviet archives released decades later confirmed the sequence of events but offered no new clarity on why seasoned hikers and trained responders alike succumbed within the same narrow corridor of windswept slope and forest edge. When the Dyatlov case was reopened in 2019 by the Russian Prosecutor General's office, the conclusion again pointed toward a natural cause, specifically a type of avalanche combined with severe weather, and the pass was declared free of criminal activity. The renewed investigation did not revisit in depth the subsequent deaths among those who had first searched the site, nor did it resolve the unease surrounding radiation traces and unexplained injuries. Today, hikers continue to traverse Dyatlov Pass, guided by memorial markers and detailed route maps, aware that both the original party and members of their search once stood on the same exposed ridge. And in the long sweep of winter wind across Kholat-Syakhl, the line between rescue and ruin still feels dangerously thin. The Mount Hood Blizzard Mission, Oregon, USA. Before daylight could reach the upper ridges of Mount Hood, radio traffic was already breaking apart under the strain of a storm that would soon test not only stranded climbers, but the search teams climbing toward them. In December 2006, what began as a winter ascent by 3 experienced alpinists quickly evolved into one of Oregon's most closely watched rescue operations. The mountain rises 11,249 feet above sea level and stands less than 50 miles from Portland, yet in severe weather it functions as a remote alpine environment where help can be delayed by hours or erased by cloud cover. As helicopters idled below the ceiling and volunteers tightened crampons at the trailhead, the blizzard advanced without hesitation. High above the timberline, Kelly James, Brian Hall and Nicholas Koshkin had chosen the Cooper Spur route, a steep, exposed line that demands precise timing even in stable conditions. Cooper Spur climbs directly along a narrow ridge on Mount Hood's northeast face, offering little shelter from wind and leaving climbers vulnerable to falling ice and rapidly forming cornices. By December 9th, worsening weather slowed their ascent and limited visibility to a matter of yards. James managed to place several cell phone calls to family members, describing whiteout conditions and the construction of a snow cave near the summit area where they intended to wait for a break in the storm. Forecast bulletins issued by the National Weather Service had already warned of a powerful Pacific system moving into the Cascade Range. Wind speeds near the summit were later estimated at over 100 miles per hour, with gusts strong enough to knock climbers off balance. Snowfall intensified as the front settled over the region, reducing contrast so completely that horizon and ground merged into a single blank field. Mount Hood's upper slopes are known for abrupt atmospheric shifts, where stable air can collapse into violent turbulence within minutes. Once the storm locked onto the peak, aerial support became inconsistent, and ground travel increasingly perilous. Mobilization unfolded with urgency as Portland Mountain Rescue, the Hood River Crag Rats, and other regional volunteer units assembled near Timberline Lodge. The Oregon National Guard prepared helicopters to conduct reconnaissance flights when conditions allowed. Search coordinators analyzed the limited phone signals from James, comparing them to established climbing routes and known shelter points near the summit. Teams packed avalanche transceivers, fixed ropes, medical supplies, and emergency bivouac gear, aware that any delay at altitude would compound the danger. Coordination required constant revision, as weather windows opened and closed without a pattern. What rescuers encountered above 9,000 feet was not simply snowfall, but a sustained horizontal force that erased visual reference and distorted sound. Ice crystals driven by wind struck exposed skin with abrasive intensity, while snow drifted into hollows and across ridgelines in unstable layers. Climbers described leaning into gusts so strong that forward progress required crawling. Navigation depended on compass bearings and memory of terrain features that could disappear under fresh accumulation within hours. Even experienced mountaineers acknowledged that orientation on the upper slopes had become uncertain, with landmarks swallowed by the storm. Intermittent cell phone signals from Kelly James provided rare fragments of clarity amid the atmospheric chaos. During recorded calls, he reported that the snow cave offered temporary shelter, though conditions outside remained violent. Investigators later confirmed that battery life diminishes rapidly in extreme cold, complicating signal strength and duration. Each electronic ping narrowed the search radius, but did not pinpoint a precise location, forcing teams to interpret data against shifting wind patterns and topography. Technology offered coordinates, yet snow movement and drifting could alter the landscape faster than maps could account for. Exertion at altitude under sustained gale-force winds transformed routine movement into prolonged physical strain for the rescuers. Volunteers rotated frequently to limit frostbite exposure and muscle exhaustion. Digging snow trenches for temporary shelter consumed energy while providing minimal protection from the wind's force. Oxygen levels at over 10,000 feet compounded fatigue, and dehydration became an overlooked hazard in freezing air where thirst signals dull. Every step demanded caution to avoid concealed ice patches or unstable drifts that could collapse under weight. The mountain presented not a single catastrophic threat, but a continuous accumulation of smaller, draining obstacles. Helicopter crews attempted summit approaches during brief lulls, navigating turbulent air currents that shoved aircraft sideways without warning. Rotor wash stirred loose snow into blinding vortices that obscured landing zones and forced abrupt withdrawals. Pilots described difficulty maintaining visual reference points against the white terrain. Ground teams advanced during a temporary calm, only to retreat when gusts returned with renewed intensity. Progress measured in hundreds of feet could be undone in minutes as tracks vanished beneath fresh snowfall. The mountain's volatility meant that even coordinated efforts struggled to maintain continuity. When rescuers ultimately located the snow cave near the summit area several days later, they found evidence of deliberate construction carved carefully into the drift. Kelly James was discovered inside, having succumbed to hypothermia after days exposed to extreme conditions. The cave's design suggested measured survival efforts, its curved ceiling shaped to reduce wind intrusion and conserve warmth. Brian Hall and Nicholas Koshkin were not found within that shelter. Search efforts extended downslope, where their bodies were later recovered along the route, consistent with attempts to descend through deteriorating weather. Official reports concluded that all three climbers died from exposure during the severe winter storm. Investigators emphasized that Mount Hood's weather systems can intensify beyond forecast projections, especially along exposed ridges like Cooper Spur. The mountain's accessibility from Portland often conceals its volatility. Despite its modest elevation compared to other peaks, it has recorded numerous fatalities over decades of climbing. Rescue coordinators acknowledge the calculated risks assumed during the mission, noting that volunteer search organisations operate within narrow safety margins when storms escalate beyond predictive models. Even with structured planning, modern equipment and coordinated aviation support, the December 2006 operation demonstrated how quickly certainty dissolves above timberline. The same wind that trapped 3 climbers pressed equally against those climbing upward to save them, forcing constant reassessment of risk and possibility. Mount Hood eventually returned to calm, its slopes reopening to skiers and climbers as if the storm had left no mark. Yet for those who studied the sequence of calls, forecasts and movements, the margin between rescue and catastrophe remained unsettlingly thin. On Mount Hood, the storm decides who descends and who never does. The Yosemite helicopter crash, California, USA. Routine missions rarely leave a mark on the landscape, yet one search flight over Yosemite National Park ended with a rescue helicopter shattered against terrain its crew knew well. On that day, the valley appeared calm from a distance, but its soaring granite walls had long been known to create hazards invisible to even the most experienced aviators. The aircraft carried a team trained for technical rescues, tasked with reaching a stranded hiker in the park's backcountry, and what began as a standard mission quickly became a study in confined air navigation, where every decision mattered. The valley's beauty belied its capacity for deadly precision. Towering granite formations such as El Capitan and Half Dome create a vertical environment where air compresses and accelerates in ways that cannot be predicted from the valley floor. Thermals and downdrafts shift suddenly as sunlight warms exposed rock, while shaded slopes remain frigid, forming invisible currents that buffet rotor blades without warning. Pilots and crews operating in these conditions must account for rapidly changing air pressure, canyon geometry, and altitude density. A small miscalculation can translate into lost lift or unexpected turbulence. Yosemite's aerial environment is as intricate as the stone it rises from, and it demands constant, meticulous attention. Configured for technical extraction, the park's helicopter carried specialized rescue equipment, including hoist systems, ropes, medical supplies, and provisions for overnight operations. Crew members were selected for proficiency in mountain flying and emergency evacuation procedures. The aircraft itself had undergone routine maintenance and was deemed fully airworthy, yet its size and rotor configuration limited maneuverability within confined valleys. Every pound of weight affected performance at altitude, and every extra item in the cabin contributed to a delicate balance between lift, power, and the surrounding granite walls. Precision was mandatory, yet even experts cannot control every variable. The assignment that day involved locating and assisting a hiker, reportedly lost in Yosemite's dense wilderness. The call for help had come from rangers familiar with the region's trails and seasonal hazards. From the ground, the task appeared straightforward: transport crew to an elevated landing point, deploy and extract the hiker. But from the air, the canyon introduced layers of complexity invisible from below. Pilots had to contend with rapidly shifting wind patterns, thermal updrafts, and potential obstacles that could appear only at a few hundred feet of altitude. This was not reckless flying, but operational work at the edge of mechanical and environmental limits. Within confined valleys, density, altitude, and rotor wash interact unpredictably with rising rock faces, reducing lift margins faster than instrumentation can convey. Pilots describe sudden buffeting when wind rebounds off sheer granite or funnels into narrow crevices. Air temperature variations between sunlit and shaded areas can create pockets of thin, turbulent air that compromise control. Even a minor adjustment of collective pitch or cyclic input can amplify instability in these conditions. The helicopter's hover capacity is finite, and when combined with canyon-induced turbulence, the margin for error is terrifyingly small. Recorded communications from the cockpit reflected methodical coordination rather than alarm, with no immediate indication that control was being compromised. Flight logs and radio transcripts indicate routine position updates and progress reports to Yosemite Dispatch. Crew members reported obstacle avoidance maneuvers and monitored altitude carefully. Nothing in the transmission suggested the extreme turbulence or mechanical challenges that were quietly building. Investigators would later note that the absence of an alarm reflected professional training, yet it also underscored how rapidly a controlled flight can transition into catastrophe in Yosemite's canyon corridors. Moments later, the aircraft struck steep terrain in an area where recovery options narrow to seconds and space collapses into stone. The helicopter came into contact with a granite slope near a narrow canyon bend, leaving little room for corrective action. Impact was sudden, leaving wreckage scattered along the slope and trapping crew members within. Witnesses on the valley floor initially observed only a cloud of rotor wash and falling debris obscuring the scope of the accident. What had begun as a precise measured mission became irrevocably fatal in an instant dictated by environment and geometry. Accessing the wreckage demanded a secondary operation as ground personnel climbed through uneven forest, fractured rock and steep canyon walls to reach their fallen colleagues. Rescue and recovery teams faced logistical challenges similar to those confronted during standard search missions, but compounded by the helicopter debris field and hazardous terrain. Every step required careful placement to avoid slips or falling rocks. Despite prior preparation, even trained professionals encountered the canyon's unpredictability firsthand, a stark reminder of how terrain and altitude can transform a recovery into an equally dangerous operation. Investigators later examined flight data, maintenance history, weather reports, and topographic factors to determine how a controlled approach became fatal. Analysis highlighted the limits of rotor lift in confined canyon corridors, the effect of downdrafts on hovering capacity, and the consequences of even small adjustments in pilot technique. Mechanical failure was ruled out. Environmental conditions alone were sufficient to overwhelm the aircraft. While the mission's intent had been rescue, the forces of Yosemite's vertical landscape proved unyielding, leaving only documentation of what went wrong in layers of reports and testimony. The official reports cited identifiable contributing factors, yet aerodynamic behavior inside Yosemite's granite corridors remains difficult to simulate fully. Pilots and aviation engineers acknowledge that, while modern modeling can estimate performance, real-time interactions between canyon walls, wind, and air density can still produce outcomes unanticipated by experience or instrumentation. Training prepares crews to anticipate turbulence, but it cannot replicate every variation in airflow that forms where vertical rock meets shifting atmospheric conditions. The helicopter's flight ended in tragedy precisely at the intersection of preparation and the unknowable complexity of the canyon. From the valley floor, the cliffs appear immobile and permanent, their faces etched with climbing routes and scenic vistas, yet between these walls, invisible air currents shift constantly. Hikers and visitors rarely perceive the unseen movement that challenges machines and humans alike, and even expert aviators are reminded that Yosemite's natural architecture operates independently of experience or planning. In this canyon, vertical distance does not equate to safety, and even the most routine rescue can transform into an irreversible encounter with precision and gravity. In Yosemite's narrow airspace, even expert hands cannot account for what the stone conceals. The Altai Avalanche Response, Siberia, Russia. A call crackled over the radio, alerting Siberian rescuers to an avalanche that had buried a remote slope in the Altai Mountains, and some who answered would never return. The message was brief, but urgent, detailing a rapidly deteriorating situation on a ridge far from the nearest settlement. The Altai region, straddling the borders of Russia, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and China, is known for its jagged peaks, glacial valleys, and sudden snow events. By the time the first team mobilized, the avalanche had already consumed a significant section of the mountainside, and officials warned that unstable snow could still sweep lower slopes without warning. Volunteers assembled quickly, aware that even minor missteps might be fatal. The region's jagged ridges and glacier-carved valleys create an unforgiving landscape where snow accumulates silently in hidden pockets and deceptively stable layers conceal deadly weakness. Snowfall from earlier storms had packed unevenly, forming layers of varying density and moisture content. Beneath the seemingly firm crust, weak layers of crystalline ice lingered, capable of failing under minimal pressure. Slopes angled between 30 and 45 degrees presented the greatest risk, particularly in sun-exposed sections where warming could loosen overlying snow. Even the most experienced mountaineers acknowledged that what appears solid can transform into a deadly flow without visible warning, turning methodical progress into a gamble. The search team was composed of mountaineers, local guides, and seasoned rescue personnel, each carrying shovels, probes, avalanche transceivers, and survival gear calibrated for sub-zero conditions. Everyone understood the protocols for working in avalanche zones: spacing to prevent the domino effect burial, constant monitoring of terrain, and pre-planned escape routes should snow release unexpectedly. Despite this preparation, the team had to move cautiously, aware that even correct procedure cannot guarantee safety against the sheer unpredictability of natural forces. Radios were checked, transceivers activated, and backpacks secured tightly to minimize hindrance, each detail essential when minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Progress toward the site required navigating deep snow with sleds and snowmobiles, while the wind intensified the chill and slowed every measured step across the slope. Temperatures hovered far below freezing, and exposed skin froze in moments of inattention. Snowmobiles left tracks that could vanish beneath fresh drifts, forcing team members to retrace steps with care. Sleds laden with medical and rescue supplies creaked under weight, and the constant physical exertion increased the risk of exhaustion and frostbite. Even walking side by side, rescuers had to remain vigilant, scanning for shifting snow, unstable cornices, and the subtle cues of terrain anomalies that often presage catastrophic collapse. Even before arrival, subtle indicators suggested instability: faint cracking sounds, shifting snow layers, and cornices hanging silently above paths the team would tread. Experienced mountaineers recognized these signs as precursors to avalanches, yet in remote regions, assessment is never absolute. Temperature gradients, sun exposure, and recent snowfall combine to create a delicate balance, where any pressure or vibration might trigger collapse. The team paused at intervals, listening for signs, probing the snow, and noting the direction of wind-driven drifts. Despite these precautions, the mountain seemed to maintain its own rhythm, one that the rescuers could observe but never fully control. In a sudden, overwhelming surge, part of the slope released, sweeping rescuers into a wall of snow whose density and speed left no time for reaction or retreat. Avalanche debris carried immense force, dragging even the strongest individuals downward and burying them beneath tons of compacted snow. Within seconds, sections of the ridge vanished under a white mass, moving faster than any human could outrun. The roar of moving snow drowned out radios and voices, and visibility dropped to near zero as dust-like ice crystals filled the air. Those caught could only cling to the hope that proximity to a ridge or tree might slow the descent, though most were overtaken entirely by the avalanche's momentum. Those not immediately engulfed scrambled to locate and dig their comrades, relying on beacon signals, probes, and frantic but organised coordination under a grey Siberian sky. Digging through compacted snow is exhausting and slow, each shovelful requiring both technique and strength. Rescuers communicated through shouted instructions and hand signals, trying to avoid triggering additional snow releases. Even with transceivers, pinpointing buried individuals was painstaking. The shifting snow constantly altered the landscape. Effort and experience were often only partially effective against the raw force of snow, and every second counted in the race against hypothermia and suffocation. Deep drifts, hidden crevasses, and wind-driven ice compounded the difficulty, forcing rescuers to work methodically while their bodies shivered in temperatures far below freezing. Sub-zero conditions sapped strength and blurred judgment, while exposure to wind intensified frostbite risk. Snow could collapse under a single misstep, and crevasses hidden beneath surface layers threatened to trap rescuers in addition to the victims. Even seasoned personnel found themselves slowed by exhaustion and the mountain's deceptive geometry. The Altai Mountains' winter landscape is both a labyrinth and a trap, turning each act of rescue into a contest against hidden and shifting dangers. Official reports later reconstructed the event, identifying snowpack weaknesses, trigger points, and the sequence of entrapment, yet many precise details remained obscured by the mountain's vast and shifting terrain. The avalanche's timing, exact path, and force were modelled with data from meteorological records and survivor testimony, but the sheer remoteness left gaps in understanding. Authorities concluded that even with proper procedures, trained rescuers were vulnerable to the unpredictable forces of a snow-laden slope. Analysis underscored the difficulty of anticipating which weak layer might give way first, and how quickly a carefully navigated slope could transform into a deadly corridor. Questions lingered. Why were trained personnel caught despite protocols? How snow layers shifted unexpectedly, and which subtle factor dictated the moment of collapse? investigators could only speculate about micro-variations in snow density, local temperature pockets, or slight terrain anomalies. Even in Siberia, where avalanche science is advanced, the mountain retains elements of mystery beyond instrumentation or calculation. Survivor accounts describe moments of normalcy preceding sudden disaster, emphasizing that experience and preparation reduce risk but cannot eliminate it. The line between safe progress and fatal misstep is perilously thin. Altai's slopes retain an austere quiet in winter, a deceptive stillness that belies how quickly layers of snow can become unstoppable forces in remote corners of Siberia. Beneath a serene white surface, every ridge, hollow and gully can conceal fragile layers capable of shifting without warning. Locals and mountaineers alike speak of the mountains with respect, acknowledging that winter operations require constant vigilance. Yet even the most cautious teams face circumstances beyond anticipation. In these valleys, the snow's weight and movement are invisible threats, and the mountain's silence conceals both the present and the consequences of human intrusion. The snow can remember every step taken on it, and forget none. The Hoodoo Lake Recovery, Alaska, USA. Ice crystals coated every branch and rock around Hoodoo Lake, where a team of Alaskan rescuers stepped carefully onto a frozen shoreline, unaware that some would never return. The lake, nestled in a remote valley framed by jagged ridges and dense spruce forests, held a deceptive calm beneath a thick layer of ice and snow. Visibility was low under a grey winter sky, and the frozen surface reflected a stillness that seemed eternal. The team, tasked with locating a missing boater who had been reported near the northern inlet, knew the terrain demanded extreme caution. Every step on the ice required measured pressure, and every footfall echoed in the still air, a reminder of the fragile boundary between safety and catastrophe. Surrounded by dense spruce forests and jagged ridges, Hoodoo Lake presents a logistical challenge that few rescue operations encounter. The valley is isolated, with limited access roads and few clear paths for overland travel, forcing teams to rely on skis, snowmobiles, and foot travel over uneven frozen terrain. Sub-zero temperatures freeze rivers and streams feeding into the lake, but these surfaces conceal air pockets and weak layers beneath solid-looking ice. Even experienced personnel must constantly scan for subtle signs of instability. In this environment, familiarity can breed overconfidence, and overconfidence can be fatal, as the lake conceals threats invisible to the eye and imperceptible to the footfall. The rescuers carried ice probes, cold weather tents, flotation devices, sleds and survival packs, each item carefully chosen for winter operations in Alaska's unforgiving wilderness. Every piece of equipment served a dual purpose, facilitating extraction and safeguarding against hypothermia, frostbite and accidental immersion. Rope systems were pre-rigged for swift deployment, while transceivers and radios provided constant, though often limited, communication with the base. Survival packs included insulated layers, emergency rations, and portable shelters to sustain the team should the terrain or conditions trap them for hours. Despite this meticulous preparation, the team knew that the lake's frozen veneer could betray even the most carefully considered precautions. Travel to the lake required cautious steps across frozen snowfields, thin ice patches, and snow-laden banks, where a single misstep could plunge a rescuer into the frigid depths. The team advanced slowly, probing each section of ice with poles before committing weight, listening for hollow sounds or subtle vibrations that might indicate weakness. Snowdrifts hidden beneath wind-blown layers concealed fractures in the ice, while partially submerged rocks and driftwood created traps that could catch a boot or sled. Even the slightest error in judgment could mean instant immersion in water too cold to survive. For hours, the team navigated these hazards, each step a deliberate negotiation between caution and necessity. Hollow sounds underfoot, subtle cracking along ice edges, and drifting snow from wind-whipped ridges signalled instability that even trained personnel could not fully predict. The ice around Hoodoo Lake responds to temperature fluctuations, wind direction, and weight distribution, forming weak zones that shift in ways impossible to map entirely. A patch that appeared solid a minute ago could collapse under pressure, and snowbanks formed from drifting wind may conceal fractures below. Experienced rescuers recognized these cues and reacted immediately, but the lake's conditions defy certainty. Every sound carried a warning, Yet even the most alert teams can be caught unaware by the environment's sudden betrayal. Suddenly, the frozen surface gave way in places, and the team was overtaken by events that moved faster than perception, leaving little opportunity for response or escape. Sections of ice cracked and collapsed beneath members' weight, sending rescuers plunging into near-freezing water. Snowdrift shifted unexpectedly, filling cracks and concealing victims from view. Even with ropes and flotation devices, the team had limited ability to stabilize the situation. The speed and mass of the collapsing ice left almost no reaction time. Those trapped beneath the surface had to contend with the shock of frigid water, entrapment beneath snow, and the crushing force of layers above, creating a lethal combination that claimed lives before help could reach them. Those who remained tried to locate and rescue their colleagues using ropes, probes, and careful coordination, battling both exhaustion and temperatures far below freezing. Shivering hands struggled to maintain grip on ropes while plunging into weakened ice themselves. Radios transmitted brief, fragmented instructions that carried over the wind but were sometimes drowned out by the sound of ice fracturing elsewhere. Probes were methodically inserted into suspicious sections of the frozen lake, while others dug through snow and ice to reach submerged bodies. Every effort was slowed by the cold, and even the strongest personnel found themselves fighting both the environment and the limits of human endurance in a struggle measured in minutes and degrees below zero. Wind gusts, snow-covered ice fractures, and the uneven terrain compounded every challenge, forcing rescuers to negotiate hazards invisible beneath a deceptive blanket of snow and ice. Even after initial collapses, the lake remained treacherous, with hidden pockets and weakened areas threatening new incidents. Navigating these zones demanded constant assessment and attention, yet fatigue and stress eroded sharpness, making errors more likely. Small fractures propagated silently beneath the snow, and isolated cracks could expand with every step. The lake's frozen surface became a shifting puzzle, where a single misjudgment could trigger another disaster, amplifying the threat of an already deadly rescue operation. Investigators later documented ice thickness, lake conditions, and procedural actions to understand how trained teams succumbed to a hazard that appeared routine and manageable at first glance. Reports highlighted variations in ice density, the unpredictable behavior of snowbanks, and subtle temperature fluctuations that made assessment unreliable. Equipment functioned as designed, yet even transceivers and ropes could not compensate for rapid, unexpected ice collapse. Analysis suggested that, despite adherence to protocol, environmental factors created conditions beyond human control. The findings underscored the challenge of frozen water rescues in remote Alaskan regions, where conditions shift in ways that are documented but not entirely preventable. Questions endure: why safety protocols failed to prevent tragedy, which subtle ice anomalies triggered collapse, and why the lake's surface betrayed those who trusted it. Witness accounts described moments of calm and routine before sudden catastrophe, emphasizing how fragile the balance is between measured procedure and environmental unpredictability. Even with meticulous preparation, the lake's frozen veneer proved deceptive, and the loss of skilled rescuers revealed that perception, training, and equipment are sometimes insufficient against nature's concealed power. The unanswered questions linger in the minds of those who survived, highlighting the inscrutable quality of Hoodoo Lake in winter. Hoodoo Lake now glimmers in quiet winter stillness, a mirror of serenity above water that conceals layers of frozen danger lurking just below. Trees line the shore, their branches heavy with snow, casting elongated shadows over the ice. From a distance it appears peaceful, inviting even casual visitors to believe in the safety of its frozen surface. Yet beneath that calm veneer, the lake holds the evidence of events that unfolded in minutes but are remembered for a lifetime. The ice is both witness and participant, silent yet unyielding, recording movements, weight, and failure with impartial permanence. Beneath Hoodoo Lake's glassy surface, the ice remembers every step and holds secrets that refuse to surface. The Mont Blanc Night Retrieval, France, Italy. Moonlight glinted off the jagged ice of Mont Blanc as a team of rescuers prepared for a night retrieval, unaware that some would vanish into the mountain's shadowed crevices. The mission was to recover a climber reported missing near a high glacial pass, but darkness transformed the terrain into a shifting maze of ice and shadow. Every ridge and serac reflected pale light in unexpected ways, creating illusions of depth and stability. Even the most experienced rescuers felt the unease that comes from walking over terrain whose dangers cannot always be seen. As ropes were secured and crampons tightened, the valley seemed to hold its breath, an unseen observer of every move. Steep glaciers and serrated seracs rise abruptly along the Franco-Italian border, their sheer angles magnified by altitude, where every breath is shallow and fatigue sets in faster than the body can compensate. The thin night air made simple tasks exhausting, each movement requiring deliberate attention. The mountain slopes are littered with hidden fissures, sudden drops, and ice towers that lean precariously over paths once deemed safe. Even under calm conditions, Mont Blanc is unforgiving, and at night the shadows exaggerate every contour, concealing both crevasses and the subtle movements of ice that can presage disaster. Human endurance meets a limit more quickly when the terrain itself seems alive with latent threat. Ropes were coiled meticulously, crampons tightened, headlamps checked, and oxygen packs strapped in anticipation of hours spent navigating frozen slopes and hidden crevasses under darkness. The rescuers worked quietly, aware that any lapse could endanger the entire team. Each piece of equipment had been chosen for high-altitude, low-temperature performance: ropes that could hold under tension, ice axes sharpened for piercing frozen snow, transceivers calibrated for intermittent signal, and insulated packs to guard against frostbite. Even with this preparation, the mountain's night brought hazards beyond protocol: shadows that hide holes, ridges that shift under wind, and ice that behaves unpredictably. The team advanced cautiously, each step measured on snow-laden ice, relying on anchors and rope lines while shadows stretched unnaturally across ridges and crevices. Headlamps cast narrow cones of light that illuminated only immediate sections of terrain, leaving the edges of the path and the gaps beyond invisible. Every crunch of snow, every hollow vibration underfoot, was a signal that the ice might not support weight. As the rescuers moved in rope teams, they continuously tested footholds and probed for instability, yet the mountain's scale and the night's deceptive quiet made complete certainty impossible. A faint groan echoed from a distant serac, and thin ice over a glacial fissure vibrated under unseen pressure, subtle warnings that trained eyes could barely interpret. Even as the rescuers paused, the ice beneath shifted imperceptibly. Snowdrifts shaped by wind and hidden crevasses concealed treacherous voids. The natural sounds of the glacier, the groaning of ice, the shifting of snow, the whisper of wind through serrated spires, created a constant disorienting hum that made it difficult to distinguish danger from environment. The mountain seemed to test both perception and nerve, a silent reminder that even experience could fail. Without warning, part of the icefield fractured, sending several rescuers tumbling into a hidden gap where visibility and reaction time offered no defense against the collapse. Rope teams strained against the sudden weight shift, and shouts echoed off distant ridges but often failed to reach those submerged in darkness. The collapse was over in seconds, yet its consequences extended across minutes of frantic attempts to assess the situation and respond. Cold water, concealed crevasses, and unstable snow combined to overwhelm the team before any organised defence could be executed. Those who remained worked frantically, probing the darkness with ice axes, managing ropes, and coordinating efforts to reach buried teammates before hypothermia or altitude sickness could claim them. Every second was critical, yet every movement was slowed by both terrain and exhaustion. Hands numbed by wind and cold struggled with knots and anchors, while headlamps illuminated only fragmented portions of the scene. Efforts to haul victims from snow-filled fissures were complicated by snowdrifts that concealed depth and width, making every lift and pull a trial against both gravity and invisibility. Wind gusts whipped across the slopes, carrying snow into frozen fissures and compounding the difficulty of movement, while the thin night air magnified exhaustion and slowed every calculation. The cold was relentless, sapping energy and blurring focus, while the mountain's contours played tricks on the eyes. Shadows made shallow depressions appear deep, while hidden edges lurked just beyond the faint cone of light. The rescuers were forced to continually reassess every step, yet even careful observation could not account for every hidden threat. In this environment, the margin between survival and disaster is measured in inches and seconds. Post-mission investigation mapped ice thickness, the collapse trajectory, and the sequence of events, yet gaps remained, leaving uncertainty over precisely why trained rescuers succumbed, despite following standard alpine protocols. Reports noted that ice at the fracture points varied unexpectedly in density, that snow bridges obscured voids, and that wind patterns shifted weight unpredictably. Equipment functioned as designed, yet even ropes, anchors, and transceivers could not mitigate the sheer speed and invisibility of the collapse. Analysis concluded that the team faced conditions that were documented but ultimately uncontrollable, underscoring the mountain's ability to overwhelm even meticulous human effort. Unanswered mysteries clung to the ridge like frost. Which hidden forces caused the collapse, how darkness distorted perception, and why meticulous preparation could not prevent tragedy. Witness accounts, sparse due to the night setting, described brief glimpses of motion before catastrophe, moments that seemed ordinary until the ice gave way. Even experts remain puzzled by the combination of subtle environmental triggers that led to such loss, illustrating how night, altitude, and terrain interact in ways that resist full understanding. The mountain preserves these unanswered questions as silently as it holds its ice. Mont Blanc towers silently above the border, its glaciers shimmering deceptively in daylight. But at night the slopes conceal every edge, trap, and unstable ridge that could claim lives in an instant. The mountain remains both majestic and merciless, its nighttime presence a lesson in caution and respect. The crevices, ice towers, and hidden gaps are unseen yet real, waiting for a moment of inattention or misjudgment. Even as daylight returns, the night's events linger in memory and in the terrain itself, a reminder that Mont Blanc's danger is both immediate and enduring. At night, Mont Blanc conceals its edges, and the darkness preserves every misstep in silence. The Taiwanese Gorge Operation, Tarakou National Park, Taiwan. Mist curled along the vertical walls of Tarakou Gorge as a search and rescue team prepared to descend into narrow cliffs, unaware that some members would vanish amidst the swirling currents and hidden ledges. The mission was prompted by a missing hiker last seen near the gorge's steep interior, but the darkness and treacherous terrain made every step a calculated risk. Towering cliffs rose like jagged teeth, and the Liwu River below churned with the remnants of recent rainfall. Shadows pooled in crevices and behind waterfalls, obscuring the boundaries between solid rock and the unseen voids. Even experienced rescuers sensed the oppressive scale of the canyon, a silent authority that demanded respect. Equipment was double-checked, knots inspected, and every rope secured, yet preparation could not erase the unpredictability lurking in the vertical terrain. The gorge plunges sharply, with waterfalls cascading into the Liwu River below, and jagged rocks jutting from walls slick with constant moisture, creating paths where a single misstep could prove fatal. Vertical ledges often measured mere inches in width, forcing rescuers to cling to moss-covered stone while relying on ropes for balance. The rock faces reflected light unpredictably, making depth perception unreliable, and narrow overhangs concealed sudden drops. Water from upstream gushed through narrow channels, sometimes unseen until it struck with force. The gorge's topography, combined with the tropical humidity, created a dense, slippery environment that left little margin for error. In these conditions, even the most experienced climbers were tested beyond ordinary limits. Harnesses were clipped, carabiners double-checked, ropes coiled and tensioned, and waterproof climbing gear strapped tightly, all intended to safeguard the team against the unpredictable vertical environment. Life vests were donned in case a fall swept a rescuer into the torrent below, and helmets were secured against the risk of falling stones dislodged by shifting rainwater. Every piece of gear had a purpose, yet no equipment could fully compensate for the gorge's hidden hazards, shifting stones, narrow ledges, and sudden water surges. The team communicated in clipped tones, aware that shouted directions could be swallowed by echoing waterfalls. Calm and focus were essential, but the gorge had a way of magnifying even minor mistakes. Slowly they lowered themselves along anchored lines, testing each foothold against slippery moss and loose stone, aware that even a brief lapse could send a rescuer into the torrent below. Each descent required measured steps and constant attention to shifting weight. The ropes strained against friction points, and the canyon amplified every sound, making distant splashes or rockfalls appear near. Despite careful coordination, the rescuers felt a creeping disorientation, as if the gorge itself was rearranging its walls in the dark. The river's roar below seemed to rise and fall unpredictably, hiding the subtle cues of approaching danger. Sudden rainfall thrashed against rock faces, while echoing river currents distorted sound, and stones occasionally tumbled from unseen ledges, creating a cacophony that blurred perception of distance and movement. Mist and water combined to obscure footholds, while droplets bouncing off rock faces made solid surfaces appear slicker than they already were. The gorge's vertical walls amplified every noise, disorienting the team and making it difficult to judge the origin of falling debris. Even a momentary lapse in attention could place a rescuer directly in harm's path. The environment was simultaneously beautiful and merciless, a living maze of water, stone, and gravity. Without warning, part of the cliff gave way, hurling rock and debris onto the team while rushing water surged into an unexpected channel, sweeping several rescuers into positions from which escape seemed impossible. Anchors held some members in place, but the sudden intensity of cascading stones and water displaced rope lines and disoriented the remaining team. Shouts and commands collided with rushing water and echoing stone, leaving confusion in their wake. Even rapid reactions could not fully counter the forces acting against the rescuers, and in moments the canyon had claimed its victims. The narrow ledges offered no refuge, and the vertical walls funneled the danger with terrifying efficiency. Those still anchored fought to stabilize themselves, extending ropes, calling to one another, and probing the debris in frantic attempts to reach their colleagues before exhaustion, shock, or flooding claimed them. Every movement was calculated, yet the gorge left almost no room for error. Hands slipped on wet stone, ropes strained under sudden shifts, and visibility was limited to the faint glow of headlamps against falling mist. Each rescuer became acutely aware of the canyon's vertical traps, realizing that a single misjudged action could be fatal. Efforts to rescue swept colleagues required both technical precision and a willingness to risk further exposure. Narrow ledges and overhanging cliffs left almost no room for maneuver, forcing rescuers to navigate precarious handholds, while the gorge's vertical walls seemed to close around them with every passing second. Rainwater sluiced through small channels, washing away dust and loose gravel, leaving surfaces even more treacherous. Rope anchors had to be relocated repeatedly to compensate for shifting rock, and every ledge appeared less stable under constant scrutiny. Even simple movements demanded absolute attention and synchronization, and the canyon seemed to respond to hesitation with unforgiving consequences. Investigators later charted rockfall patterns, rapid water surges, and rope placement, yet no reconstruction could fully explain how experienced rescuers succumbed despite using every precaution documented for canyon operations. Terrain analysis revealed that the gorge's verticality amplified minor failures, while unpredictable water channels created hazards impossible to anticipate fully. Equipment functioned as intended, and team protocols were followed meticulously, yet the combination of vertical cliffs, rushing water, and tropical rain led to outcomes that defied complete explanation. The investigation highlighted how nature's complexity can overwhelm even human expertise. An unsettling sense of unpredictability clung to the gorge. Currents shifted too quickly, rain-soaked surfaces betrayed every step, and even calculated movements could not account for the sudden violence of nature. Each descent carried the potential for disaster, and the rescuers' experience was tested beyond conventional limits. Observers noted that the combination of echoing sound, obscured sightlines, and hidden vertical traps contributed to a disorientation that intensified the risk. Even minor environmental shifts could cascade into life-threatening events before anyone could react, leaving the canyon's true danger partially inscrutable. Tarako's cliffs rise silently above the Liwu River, magnificent in daylight yet merciless in shadow, where hidden ledges, unstable rock, and rushing waters can claim even the most prepared team. The gorge presents an illusion of serenity from a distance, masking the lethal conditions within. Each twist of the cliff, each narrow ledge, and every surging channel is a test of balance, nerve, and judgment. While rescue teams train for technical scenarios, Tarako's natural complexity ensures that preparedness meets limits no manual can fully anticipate. Even after the incident, the gorge's vertical walls remain a silent witness to the disaster. Even when the gorge is silent, it holds the echoes of every misstep and the secrets of those who vanished without a trace. The Brazilian Cave Extraction, Minas Gerais, Brazil. The cave's mouth yawned like an unmarked abyss, and the Minas Gerais rescue team paused at its threshold, sensing that the labyrinth beyond had claimed more than a single missing hiker. The mission was meant to recover someone trapped in the depths of a limestone system, but the team immediately confronted the overwhelming scale of the subterranean network. Narrow shafts descended into darkness, while twisting tunnels stretched unpredictably, making every plan subject to the cave's hidden whims. Even with years of experience in cave rescue, the team could not fully anticipate how unstable rock, rising water and confined spaces might combine to deadly effect. Every member felt the oppressive weight of the underground walls, their echoing silence amplifying the tension in ways impossible to measure. Preparation, discipline, and communication would be tested beyond ordinary limits, as the environment allowed no margin for error. Narrow passageways twisted unpredictably, with vertical shafts plunging into darkness, stalactites hanging like frozen daggers, and subterranean streams whispering the threat of sudden flooding. Each corridor presented a new challenge: floors slick with moisture, ceilings low enough to force crouching, and unexpected drops concealed by shadows. The limestone formations, shaped over millennia, created both stunning beauty and lethal traps. Small chambers collected water from above, forming pools that could hide jagged rock or sudden currents. Echoes distorted every sound, making the rushing of distant streams seem alarmingly close. Even well-lit areas offered little comfort, as the cave's interior constantly shifted perception and amplified minor dangers into urgent threats. Ropes were secured, harnesses checked, helmets tightened, and waterproof gear fastened, each item chosen for protection against the cave's slippery floors and hidden drops. Carabiners clicked into place, anchors were tested multiple times, and lifelines were doubled in critical areas. Communication devices were switched on, though the signal was limited in the deep chambers. The team relied on headlamps and hand signals, anticipating the cave's constant interruptions to visual and auditory cues. Every precaution was necessary, yet the very nature of a limestone cave, its unpredictable collapses and sudden water surges, meant that no setup could guarantee safety. The team advanced carefully, crawling through tight crawlways and lowering themselves over slick rock ledges, every movement deliberate and measured against unseen hazards. Hands and knees found small ledges, while helmets scraped against stalactites, and careful coordination was required to avoid pulling ropes over sharp edges. Each step was a test of precision, as the confined space magnified even minor slips. Water dripped steadily from above, saturating shoes and gloves, and the constant sound of dripping echoed through narrow chambers, disorienting even the most experienced rescuers. They pressed forward, knowing that hesitation could be as dangerous as misstep. Shadows shifted across chamber walls as pockets of low oxygen and unstable rock formations created a constant silent tension that required vigilance with every breath. The air sometimes grew thin in deeper sections, slowing reaction times and increasing fatigue. Loose stones threatened to give way under weight, and unseen crevices opened suddenly beneath hands or boots. Even in complete concentration, the team could not fully measure the stability of every surface. The interplay of darkness, echoing water, and hidden drop-offs made the environment feel alive, as though the cave itself was testing every decision and every movement. A sudden surge of underground water roared through a previously dry chamber, sweeping multiple rescuers toward sharp rock edges and forcing rapid decisions in confined spaces. The torrent came without warning, accelerated by upstream rainfall, and filled narrow channels in seconds. Those caught by the current struggled to anchor themselves or grab footholds, while others tried desperately to throw lines or extend ropes. The cave amplified the sound of rushing water, making it difficult to locate each rescuer or judge distance. Every second counted, yet the environment made coordinated action nearly impossible. By the time the surge subsided, the team realized that some had been swept into positions from which escape would be difficult, if not impossible. Those still anchored scrambled to secure themselves and reach their colleagues, stretching ropes across slick surfaces and bracing against the walls as panic and adrenaline collided. The confined chambers allowed only incremental movement, and each adjustment demanded focus and physical effort beyond normal endurance. Gloved hands slipped, ropes rattled over jagged edges, and voices were lost amid echoing torrents. Survival required simultaneous technical skill and improvisation, with little room for error. Even as they worked, the cave's unpredictable nature continued to threaten, turning every attempt to help into a dangerous gamble. Twisting tunnels and sharp turns left little room for movement, amplifying every misstep and forcing rescuers to navigate a terrain that felt as if it were alive and closing in. Narrow corridors forced single-file movement, while sudden vertical shifts demanded careful rappelling or climbing. Water dripping from above added a constant slipperiness, and tight corners obscured the positioning of team members ahead or behind. Each turn was a reminder that the cave could isolate a rescuer instantly, leaving them alone with the sudden perils of unstable rock or rising water. The labyrinthine network magnified stress and exhaustion, and the mental weight of the environment became as dangerous as the physical threats. Investigators later mapped rockfall patterns, water surge timing, and rope placement, yet the sequence of events revealed hazards that no standard cave rescue protocol could have fully anticipated. Analysis confirmed that the cave's natural complexity overwhelmed even the most prepared measures, with multiple small failures compounding into disaster. Equipment worked as designed, yet natural forces, the precise collapse of rock, the unexpected arrival of water, and confined geometry created outcomes beyond human control. Reviewers noted that the cave's unpredictability, combined with the team's confined operating environment, made survival contingent on chance as much as skill. A sense of profound unpredictability lingered in the caverns. The water rose faster than expected, walls crumbled without warning, and even practiced judgment seemed powerless in the subterranean labyrinth. Experienced rescuers reported that movement through the cave felt like negotiating shifting sands, only with stone and water instead of earth. Every decision had immediate consequences, and every attempt at stabilization could be undone in an instant. The cave's response to external conditions, rainfall, shifting rocks, water surges, was impossible to fully anticipate, leaving an enduring question of how tragedy struck despite careful preparation. Minuscaraya's caves are serene in daylight but conceal a deadly, unpredictable world beneath the surface, where every corridor and chamber hides hidden peril. From the outside, the limestone formations appear placid and static, yet within, currents, drops, and echoes conceal lethal hazards. The rescue team's experience highlights how subterranean environments can transform ordinary hazards into deadly forces, and how even the best training may fall short against nature's complexity. Every ledge, tunnel, and vertical shaft holds a silent reminder of the fragility of human control underground. The cave's silence preserves every misstep, holding the memory of those who disappeared where sunlight never reaches. The Scottish Highlands Whiteout, Cairngorms, Scotland. The wind cut across the Cairngorm Plateau like a sharpened blade as the rescue team prepared to track missing hikers, unaware that the mountains themselves could erase their presence. The team had been summoned to search for a group that had vanished during a winter trek, their disappearance sparking concern among local authorities. Cairngorms National Park, with its expansive plateaus and sudden ridges, is notorious for treacherous winter conditions that can overwhelm even experienced mountaineers. Despite careful planning and communication, the team faced the immediate challenge of gauging a route in a landscape where familiar landmarks could vanish under falling snow. Every movement was deliberate. Every glance over the shoulder revealed only white, a featureless expanse that blurred the boundaries of land and sky. The group's initial briefing emphasized caution, yet the severity of the environment promised to test both endurance and decision-making. Even seasoned rescuers could not entirely predict the Cairngorms' capacity for sudden, lethal change, where gusts of wind and drifting snow could erase their tracks in moments. Ridges rose abruptly from the frozen expanse, with hidden valleys and snow-packed cliffs concealing treacherous drops beneath a deceptively smooth surface. The terrain was a labyrinth of frozen contours, where a step in the wrong place could trigger a slide into a concealed ravine. Snow cornices perched along cliff edges created a fragile overhang that could collapse under weight, while valleys collected drifting snow, masking both holes and hidden ice. The team had to continually probe the ground with poles, testing every step before advancing, aware that natural features could betray even the most careful observer. Even minor deviations from the path could leave rescuers exposed to sudden falls or hidden crevasses. The mountain's deceptive calm made every miscalculation potentially fatal, and the teamers knew that visual references might vanish within minutes in worsening conditions. A dense whiteout descended without warning, reducing visibility to mere meters and carrying gusts that threatened to knock even the most cautious rescuers off balance. The snow swirled in disorienting patterns, flattening shadows and erasing depth perception. Navigation became increasingly difficult, as compass readings were influenced by subtle magnetic variations and familiar slopes were hidden beneath the falling powder. Communication among team members required shouting over the roar of the wind, but even proximity offered limited assurance. Voices were muffled, distances misjudged, and separation occurred almost instantly. The whiteout transformed a familiar mountain ridge into a featureless expanse, where orientation depended on intuition as much as technical skill. Layered clothing, reinforced boots, GPS units, avalanche probes, and radio transmitters were inspected and readied, each essential for survival in the unpredictable highland weather. Equipment was meticulously checked for functionality, from GPS batteries to flare canisters, with each item representing a potential lifeline. The team also carried portable shelters, thermal blankets, and emergency rations, preparing for the possibility of being stranded in sub-zero temperatures. Even with such preparation, they were aware that the mountain could negate these precautions. Shifting snowdrifts and the sudden onset of darkness could render the most sophisticated gear inadequate. Step by careful step, the team advanced across wind-blasted snowfields, scanning for faint traces while the blizzard obliterated every landmark they had memorized. Tracks from previous hikers were quickly covered by blowing snow, leaving only faint depressions that might be misread or led to false paths. Each step required caution, as snow could conceal treacherous ice beneath, and a single misjudged footing might trigger a slide. Team members constantly scanned both sides for potential hazards, from sudden crevasses to unstable cornices, while trying to maintain formation amid rapidly changing conditions. The tension was palpable, with every breath visible in the freezing air and every movement carrying risk. Snowdrifts hid the contours of the terrain, while sudden ice patches and concealed ravines turned every stride into a potential hazard, demanding unwavering focus. The team deployed avalanche probes at intervals, checking snow depth and density, yet the shifting weather made even this method uncertain. Shadows and uneven surfaces created optical illusions, while wind-driven snow could hide cracks that spanned meters. Navigating required both mental acuity and physical endurance, as the team had to judge slope angles and footing with only partial information. Even a momentary lapse could result in serious injury or separation from the group. An unexpected gust separated several rescuers from the main group, forcing them to scramble for footing as the whiteout swallowed familiar paths and muffled cries. The isolated members relied on flares and whistle signals, but the blizzard distorted both light and sound. Snow piled rapidly, covering the tracks they had made just moments before, and landmarks vanished in the haze. Attempts to call back to the main team were met with static and uncertainty, leaving them to navigate by instinct alone. The environment had become as much a threat as any unseen cliff or ravine. Efforts to regroup involved frantic calls over static-filled radios, the launching of flares, and repeated attempts to navigate using partially buried markers as reference points. Every maneuver was slowed by the treacherous snow and low visibility. Team members climbed ridges and descended gullies, marking paths with temporary indicators, yet the snow often obscured these markers within minutes. Each attempt to locate missing colleagues added to exhaustion and heightened the risk of further accidents. The mountain, impartial to human urgency, allowed no shortcuts or guarantees. Post-incident analysis revealed the combination of extreme wind, disorienting snowfall, and subtle elevation changes created conditions no conventional training could fully mitigate. Meteorological data indicated gusts exceeding 80 km per h and whiteout visibility of under 10 meters in critical areas. Rescue logs documented routes taken and approximate times, but the dynamic terrain meant that even experienced navigators could not reliably track progress. Every calculated decision faced the potential for sudden environmental reversal. demonstrating how quickly mountains could overwhelm human intervention. The disappearance of experienced personnel within minutes left lingering questions about the sudden escalation of danger and the mountain's hidden intricacies. Investigators noted that the team's training had prepared them for cold, snow and wind, but not for the combination of disorientation, fast-changing terrain and cumulative fatigue. Some equipment functioned as intended, yet the team's separation and the rapid onset of blinding snow rendered even the most reliable devices insufficient. The mountains preserved their own record, one only partially visible to those who studied the aftermath. Though serene under a pale sky, the Cairngorm's highland expanses conceal hazards capable of overwhelming even the most seasoned teams, transforming beauty into peril. Snow-covered plateaus and silent ridges give the impression of stillness, yet beneath that surface lies a lethal combination of ice, wind, and disorientation. The mountains do not distinguish between novice hikers and expert rescuers. All are vulnerable to misjudged steps and the merciless conditions of winter. Snow blankets the mountains in deceptive calm, yet somewhere within, the lost team's path remains forever unread. The Andes Glacier Retrieval, Argentina. Atop the gleaming expanse of the Argentine Andes, the rescue team readied itself to recover climbers trapped on a high-altitude glacier, unaware of the hazards hidden beneath the frozen surface. The team had been dispatched following reports that a mountaineering party had gone missing near the upper reaches of the glacier, where towering ice walls and jagged ridges dominate the landscape. Each member checked gear meticulously, aware that miscalculations in such a hostile environment could be fatal. Communication lines had been established, but the team knew that radios often faltered among the ice cliffs and wind tunnels that carved the glacier's surface. Even the most experienced rescuers understood that glaciers are living landscapes, constantly shifting, cracking, and rearranging themselves. Every step required calculation, every glance at the horizon demanded vigilance, and the mountain air was thin enough to make the body ache with exertion. Snow sparkled under the high-altitude sun, but beauty offered no comfort, only the reminder that the glacier's surface could betray even the most cautious adventurer. Crevasses snaked across the ice like frozen rivers, while towering seracs loomed unpredictably, their fragile bases threatening to collapse under even minimal pressure. The team paused frequently to survey the terrain, noting faint cracks and subtle discolorations that might indicate hidden hazards. Snow bridges spanning crevasses were deceptive. A single misstep could plunge a rescuer into darkness far below the glacier's surface. The jagged ice formations shifted imperceptibly over hours, making landmarks unreliable. The rescuers marked their path with flags and rope anchors, yet even these precautions offered only temporary reassurance against the glacier's ever-changing nature. Ice and snow, though seemingly solid, could fracture without warning, and the echoes of falling ice carried far across the hollow expanse, a reminder of the environment's latent violence. The thin mountain air pressed against their lungs, each breath heavier than the last, as sub-zero temperatures gnawed at exposed skin and stiffened muscles. Altitude sickness crept silently, bringing fatigue, dizziness, and disorientation that could undermine even the most practiced climber's judgment. Hands numbed despite gloves, and frostbite threatened extremities exposed to the wind. The rescuers had to pace themselves carefully, balancing urgency with the physiological realities of operating above 4,000 meters. Even minor exertions required calculated effort, as exhaustion could reduce reaction times at the very moment critical decisions were required. Crampons clinked against ice, ropes were double-checked, and harnesses fastened, each piece of equipment a lifeline in a landscape that refused to forgive error. Ice axes were gripped tightly, ready to arrest a fall, while carabiners and belay systems formed a chain of mechanical safety between each rescuer. GPS units were calibrated, emergency beacons tested, and flares packed for immediate deployment. The team had practiced countless scenarios, but real-world glaciers were unpredictable, and equipment could fail in unforeseen ways. Even meticulous preparation could not fully account for the combined effects of hidden crevasses, unstable ice, and sudden weather shifts. The team advanced cautiously, probing the snow with axes and poles, testing each bridge of ice before committing their weight to the uncertain surface. Every creaking sound, every slight displacement of snow demanded immediate attention. Communication was constant, with rescuers alerting one another to potential weaknesses in the ice or unexpected movements in the surrounding seracs. Mistakes could be fatal, and progress was slow, measured in deliberate steps rather than distance covered. The tension was compounded by the knowledge that a single misjudgment could trigger a chain reaction, pulling others into danger along the glacier's steep slopes. Hidden fractures opened suddenly beneath the snow, seracs shifted with a muffled groan, and loose ice threatened to dislodge without warning. The team navigated carefully around crevasses whose true depth could not be determined until it was too late. Snow cover gave false reassurance, hiding chasms that swallowed sound and light alike. Occasionally, the team paused to secure anchor points in solid ice, yet even these attempts carried risk. Ice itself could fracture or collapse, leaving rescuers dangling above invisible voids. A single misstep sent one rescuer sliding toward a concealed chasm, forcing the rest to respond instantly to prevent disaster from escalating. Rope systems were deployed, belays adjusted, and urgent coordination required both calm judgment and physical strength. The glacial environment left little room for hesitation. Seconds determined life or death. Nearby seracs groaned under accumulated stress, and every movement of the ice added to uncertainty, making rescue efforts themselves perilous. Shouts echoed across the glacier, tangled with the roar of shifting ice, as ropes were anchored and attempts to regain cohesion stretched the limits of both skill and stamina. The team's movements became synchronized, each member communicating with hand signals, shouted directions, and careful eye contact. They advanced in cautious, deliberate formation, ensuring that no one wandered too close to the edge of hidden crevasses. Even then, the glacier maintained its own rhythm, and hazards emerged faster than any precaution could anticipate. A post-event investigation revealed the glacier had moved significantly in the days prior, creating new fissures and unstable surfaces that no map or prior reconnaissance could predict. Satellite imagery and historical data confirmed the glacier's rapid seasonal shift, showing that areas previously considered safe had transformed into labyrinths of fractured ice. Meteorological records indicated recent storms, high winds, and warming periods that could trigger sudden ice collapses or weaken snow bridges. Analysts concluded that the team faced a combination of environmental variables that no single mitigation strategy could have fully addressed. The reasons why seasoned rescuers vanished so swiftly remain as elusive as the shifting ice, leaving only traces that seem to disappear almost immediately. Even with thorough preparation, experience, and modern equipment, the team's disappearance demonstrates the glacier's capacity to absorb humans into its shifting expanse, erasing evidence and confounding investigations. Colleagues and local authorities have speculated about a sudden collapse, hidden ice fractures, or rapid movement of snow and ice that left the team unable to respond. Yet definitive answers remain beyond reach, the mountain holding its secrets with impenetrable silence. Even under clear skies, the glacial expanse remained deceptive, its frozen beauty masking deep, shifting threats that render any human presence precarious. Travelers and rescuers alike are reminded that a glacier's apparent stillness is illusory. Movement, hidden chasms, and constant ice pressure make it one of the most unpredictable landscapes on Earth. What appears serene in sunlight can turn deadly within minutes, and every snow bridge or ridge holds the potential to betray those who trust it blindly. Amid the glittering crevasses and ever-moving ice, the vanished team's fate is inscribed only in the glacier's silent memory. The Grand Canyon Flash Flood, Arizona, USA. Thunder rolled through the stone corridors of the Grand Canyon, and rain began to fall in heavy sheets across distant ridges, hinting at the peril that would soon surge through the dry washes below. The canyon's walls, carved over millennia, funneled every drop of water into channels that could transform without warning. Pools quickly formed in rocky depressions, and distant echoes of cascading water suggested the landscape was already shifting in ways few could predict. The narrow side canyons, so often dry and deceptively calm, seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, a prelude to the flood that would soon surge through their depths. Sheer sandstone cliffs rose like walls of a natural fortress, their vertical faces casting long shadows over the gullies where water would soon race. Debris collected along ledges and in alcoves was already trembling under the impact of early rainfall. The canyon's geology, with its layered rock and hidden fissures, made predicting water flow nearly impossible. Channels that seemed innocuous could fill in minutes, turning walkable washes into torrents. Even hikers familiar with these paths knew that the Grand Canyon could shift from serene to lethal almost instantaneously, a reminder that nature's power often outpaced human understanding. Pools of rainwater deepened as clouds thickened above the canyon rims, and the distant roar of descending water became more distinct, carrying the sound of debris clashing and rushing downstream. Dry riverbeds began to shimmer as the first waves of water trickled through gravel and stone, hinting at the strength of what was yet to come. The sudden transformation of familiar terrain instilled a sense of unease, a subtle warning that would only grow louder with every passing minute. In the canyon's hidden corridors, there was a palpable tension in the air, the sort that made even seasoned observers pause to consider the imminent danger. Into this rapidly changing landscape, the search and rescue team arrived, moving with calculated urgency while surveying the treacherous channels. Their mission was to reach a group of hikers reported missing after the early afternoon storm had trapped them in a side canyon. The team paused to evaluate water levels and potential routes, noting where the canyon's natural features might provide safety or conceal hazards. Experience in desert canyons taught them to respect the suddenness of flash floods, and every decision now carried extraordinary weight. The walls of the canyon seemed to lean inward, constricting movement and amplifying the roar of the storm as if the landscape itself was alive. Ropes were coiled, harnesses fastened, and waterproof gear checked as the team prepared to descend into the narrow washes. Helmets were tightened and carabiners clipped with precision, ensuring that every piece of equipment could function under the stress of moving water. They had trained for desert floods, but the Grand Canyon's complex network of channels and rapid changes in water flow posed unique challenges. Even the most advanced tools offered only a measure of security against torrents that could rise with shocking speed. The rescuers' focus was absolute, their every movement deliberate and methodical as they balanced the urgency of the mission against the ever-present threat of the canyon's hidden currents. Cautiously, they descended into side canyons, probing water depth with poles and scanning for signs of the hikers or unstable terrain. Gravel and boulders shifted underfoot, forcing careful foot placement, while shallow pools sometimes masked deeper, rushing currents beneath. Each turn revealed new hazards, sudden drops, sharp rocks, and narrow passages where water could accelerate dangerously. The canyon's walls echoed every sound, amplifying the noise of the storm and making it difficult to determine the direction of the strongest currents. Even minor miscalculations could lead to slides or falls, and the team advanced with a combination of expertise and instinct honed from years of experience. Within minutes, the flood surged through the canyon's channels, racing over rocks and sweeping branches, logs and debris into the rushing water. The rescuers found themselves forced to scramble to higher ground, gripping rock ledges and anchor points to avoid being carried away. Water surged unpredictably, sometimes splitting into parallel channels that complicated navigation and threatened to isolate members of the team. The canyon, which moments before had seemed navigable, had transformed into a relentless moving force, reminding all present that even well-trained rescuers could be vulnerable. Hands clutched ropes and axes as the team fought to stabilize themselves, bracing against the current's strength while attempting to secure stranded hikers where possible. Rope anchors were shifted and reinforced, and communication relied on shouted instructions carried over the roar of rushing water. The canyon's confined spaces intensified the sound and force of the flood, making coordination difficult and movements perilous. Even the strongest members were tested to their limits, with exhaustion and fear combining with the raw power of the water to create a tense, life-threatening situation. Radio communications faltered as signals bounced off the canyon walls, forcing a reliance on hand signals and shouted directions to maintain cohesion. Every movement required constant vigilance, as the team needed to anticipate sudden changes in water level or debris flow. The canyon's branching side channels concealed new hazards that could emerge without warning, making it impossible to predict where the flood's force would concentrate next. Despite these obstacles, the rescuers pressed forward, determined to locate the missing hikers while preserving their own safety. Analysis after the incident revealed that upstream rainfall had created an extraordinary volume of runoff, funneled through narrow tributaries that amplified water velocity and force. Geologists and meteorologists later noted that the canyon's unique topography had accelerated the flood in ways few had anticipated, while debris carried by the water compounded the danger. The team had confronted conditions that exceeded even conservative safety estimates, leaving minimal margin for error in their movements. While the environment was well understood in theory, the reality of the flash flood's speed and intensity defied expectations. The team's disappearance remains a chilling mystery, with torrents and debris likely concealing the exact circumstances of their final moments. Even with ropes, anchors, and careful navigation, the water claimed positions quickly, erasing tracks and scattering evidence throughout the canyon. Speculation continues about how quickly the flood advanced and which obstacles may have prevented the rescuers from reaching safety. What is clear is that the Grand Canyon, in its vast and unforgiving form, absorbed the team into its sudden fury, leaving investigators to piece together fragments of an event almost too rapid to comprehend. When the floodwaters finally receded, the canyon returned to a deceptive calm, its walls silent witnesses to the sudden violence that had passed. Sand and gravel were rearranged, logs and debris scattered across the washes, and the sound of dripping water replaced the roar of the torrents. Observers could trace the flood's path only through subtle clues, yet the full scope of its impact remained hidden. Nature had reclaimed the space, leaving little evidence of the struggle, and the canyon appeared as timeless and untouched as it had before the storm. In the twisting washes and stone corridors, the vanished team's fate is etched only in the canyon's relentless, silent currents. The Japanese forest. Search. Aokigahara, Japan. A dense canopy choked the sunlight, turning familiar paths into shadowed corridors where sound seemed to vanish before it could travel. The forest floor, layered with volcanic soil and jagged rock, absorbed the noise of careful footsteps, leaving only an eerie hush. In the midst of this suffocating quiet, a search and rescue team entered to locate missing hikers, their presence almost unnatural against the immensity of the landscape. Reports of disappearances and unexplained vanishings added a grim layer to the mission, and the rescuers could already sense the oppressive weight of a place that had long confounded authorities. Roots twisted like serpents across the volcanic terrain, hiding pockets of unstable ground that threatened to swallow a foot or topple a rescuer into the unseen ravines. Every step demanded attention. A single misstep could mean injury or worse. Small caves and fissures punctuated the undergrowth, their openings dark and foreboding. The team proceeded slowly, marking each path to prevent disorientation in a forest that was notorious for confusing even experienced trackers. The physical challenges of the terrain mirrored the psychological tension that built with every glance into shadowed hollows and behind seemingly innocent clumps of underbrush. Legends and documented disappearances lent the forest an almost sentient weight, as if the trees themselves remembered those who had entered and never returned. Local authorities had long warned that Aokigahara's dense growth could make tracking impossible, and decades of missing person reports lent an ominous credibility to these claims. The rescuers felt a quiet pressure that was not entirely physical. The forest seemed to observe, to resist their intrusion. Even with careful preparation, each step deeper into the labyrinthine paths emphasized that the forest's history was layered, opaque, and indifferent to human effort. The rescue team moved cautiously, ropes coiled and radios checked, their movements deliberate against the unnatural stillness. The forest absorbed their voices, leaving commands and responses ghostly and delayed. They relied heavily on visual markers and experience, navigating through steep inclines and deceptive depressions. Each member understood that time was critical. Missing hikers may have been injured, stranded, or disoriented. Yet the oppressive atmosphere lent a sense that the forest itself delayed their progress, hiding its secrets beneath every branch and undergrowth. It was a place where expertise met uncertainty, and human skill struggled against nature's deliberate design. Every turn revealed another network of narrow passages, fissures, and rocky ledges, forcing the team to move with heightened caution. Maps offered little guidance as landmarks repeated, loops formed naturally, and paths disappeared under fallen debris or thick moss. The volcanic soil shifted unpredictably, creating unstable footing, and every step became an exercise in anticipation. Even the faintest breeze suggested movement where there was none, while distant sounds, rocks tumbling, branches snapping, could be either natural or ominous indicators of danger. Each obstacle intensified the tension, a reminder that this forest had swallowed countless visitors before and could do so again without notice. Scattered personal items and subtle signs of previous visitors suggested that others had passed this way, yet the forest provided no clues as to their fate. Pieces of cloth, forgotten footwear, and footprints half buried in volcanic ash hinted at prior presence but revealed nothing definitive. The team catalogued each find meticulously, yet the lack of continuity was disorienting, like reading a story without a clear sequence. Each item became a silent question, a fragment of human history swallowed by the forest's complexity. Even as they documented evidence, a creeping sense emerged that the forest was simultaneously guide and deceiver, offering fragments that both illuminated and obscured truth. Shadows shifted under the canopy, and sudden noises, branches snapping, rocks tumbling, served as constant reminders of hidden dangers. The rescuers felt the forest pressing in, each sound magnified by its emptiness. Visibility remained limited, and the labyrinth of trees created false directions, echoing footsteps and phantom movements. Even minor slips or misjudgments amplified the tension, reminding the team that mistakes could escalate rapidly. Nature itself seemed in control, dictating pace and path. The forest's silence was punctuated by unpredictable hazards, and the rescuers were forced to adapt continuously, balancing caution with the urgency of locating those who had vanished. Attempts at communication were repeatedly interrupted, radios crackling and fading as if the dense vegetation absorbed sound. Visual contact became unreliable, with team members occasionally separated by only a few meters yet invisible to each other. The psychological strain of isolation intensified, amplifying the forest's oppressive character. Without reliable signals, each step required trust in intuition and experience. Even minor errors in coordination could lead to a separation that was difficult to correct. In a place designed to disorient and conceal, technological aids faltered, leaving humans exposed to the full weight of the environment's unpredictability and the eerie reputation of the forest. The rescuers disappeared into narrow ravines, swallowed by the forest's intricate geography, leaving behind only echoes and brief traces of movement. Their progress became increasingly difficult to track, as every path repeated itself and landmarks failed to provide orientation. The forest's deceptive simplicity masked vertical shafts, hidden depressions, and moss-covered obstacles that concealed the team's exact location. Even with the utmost caution, the rescuers were effectively isolated within the labyrinth. Observers on the periphery could see nothing more than shifting foliage and the occasional glimmer of equipment, as if the forest itself was erasing their presence from memory. Those who later attempted to reconstruct the search found minimal traces, flattened moss, faint footprints, and scattered tools, but no clear explanation for the sudden disappearance. Investigations were hampered by the forest density and the lack of any surviving accounts from the team. Experts acknowledged the environment's unique challenges, but could not fully account for how a group so trained could vanish so completely. Despite careful record-keeping and methodical retracing, the forest offered no answers, only silent reminders of its capacity to absorb and conceal. Every attempt at understanding was met with the same ambiguity, reinforcing the forest's enigmatic and unyielding nature. Seasons passed, yet the forest remained undisturbed, its oppressive calm concealing the evidence of lives lost and events that had unfolded in silence. Occasional hikers reported fleeting shadows or the faintest echoes of voices, but these were dismissed as imagination or natural sounds amplified by the dense environment. The absence of a definitive explanation only heightened Aokigahara's ominous reputation. Time itself seemed to slow within the thick canopy, as though the forest imposed its own rhythm on all who entered. The vanished rescuers were folded into the landscape, their disappearance becoming another layer in a history already dense with mystery and loss. In Aokigahara, the lost rescuer's presence is woven into the forest's shadowed corridors, where even the passage of years cannot disturb its secrets. The Norwegian fjord descent was Trollveggen, Norway. Towering above the fjord, Trollveggen's vertical face seemed almost impossible to scale, its jagged cliffs disappearing into low-hanging mist that blurred the line between rock and sky. From the narrow paths at the top, one could feel the gravity of the wall pressing downward, a vast sheet of stone rising relentlessly from the fjord's waters. Climbers who ventured near the edge spoke of vertigo so intense that even the strongest among them hesitated. Local guides whispered of accidents, fatal and inexplicable, as if the cliff itself had claimed souls for centuries. This natural monument, awe-inspiring yet lethal, would soon become the stage of a rescue mission unlike any other. Loose stones rattled underfoot as wind gusts swept across narrow ledges, each step demanding absolute precision to avoid a fatal slip. The cliff's surface was littered with debris, small rocks, and ice fragments that could give way without warning. Every crevice seemed to conceal hidden dangers, and the combination of sheer vertical drops and the relentless wind made even minor movements perilous. The fjord below reflected dim sunlight off dark waters, emphasizing the dizzying height. In such an environment, the margin for error was non-existent. A single misstep could send a climber plummeting hundreds of meters into the abyss. Tales of climbers who had vanished or narrowly escaped death had long shrouded the wall in an ominous reputation, whispered among mountaineering circles as a place that claimed the unwary. Guides recounted stories of experienced alpinists caught in sudden storms, ropes snapping and belays failing. Some reported eerie echoes bouncing off the cliff face, sounds of movement where no human presence existed. These narratives contributed to the almost mythic fear that surrounded Trollvegen, making it a revered and dreaded destination. The stories suggested that danger was embedded not only in the rock, but in the very atmosphere of the fjord, as though the cliff exerted a quiet, unyielding influence over those who dared approach. Climbers roped themselves together with measured care, their harnesses and carabiners reflecting faint light as they began the perilous descent in search of those who had disappeared. Their goal was to locate a team that had failed to return from a prior expedition, a group of adventurers who had ventured into the wall's maze of ledges and vertical chasms. Preparations were meticulous, anchors secured, ropes double-checked, and every movement choreographed to reduce risk. Still, the enormity of the cliff made each decision feel fragile, the difference between safety and disaster a matter of inches. The rescuers understood that this descent would test both their physical skill and their mental endurance. Sudden rockfalls and hidden crevices forced careful navigation, the sound of shifting stone echoing off the cliff and magnifying every misstep. Even the most experienced climbers found themselves startled by the cacophony of falling debris. Loose rocks tumbled unpredictably, sometimes grazing their boots or bouncing off walls before disappearing into the void below. The cliff was alive with motion, a reminder that no human control could tame it. Ledges appeared stable but could crumble under weight, and tiny fissures threatened to widen with the force of wind and gravity. Each step demanded unwavering focus, and the rescuers had to balance speed with caution in a place that punished even minor errors. Anxiety gripped the team as vertigo set in. Staring down thousands of feet of sheer drop made coordination and focus an exhausting test of mental endurance. The psychological strain was compounded by the fjord's constant roar, the wind whipping past, echoing in unnatural tones, making it difficult to gauge distances or maintain calm. Time seemed suspended on the vertical wall, and the human mind began to wrestle with invisible hazards. Even experienced climbers found their confidence wavering. Every movement was a negotiation with the cliff itself, and the rescuers' thoughts oscillated between determination and a creeping awareness of the cliff's unpredictability. A sudden fog rolled upward from the fjord, concealing ledges and creating illusions of solid ground where there was none, while distant echoes of falling stones added a haunting rhythm to their progress. Visibility dropped sharply, and familiar landmarks disappeared into the white haze. Shadows of rock distorted, creating a disorienting panorama where one ledge could appear as another. The rescuers relied heavily on ropes and tactile feedback, yet even these measures could not fully offset the treacherous illusions imposed by the fog. Each step became an act of faith, and the atmosphere seemed to thicken with anticipation, as if the wall itself were testing the limits of human perception. Signs of prior climbers, discarded gloves, rope fragments, and chalk markings hinted at human struggle but offered no guidance, leaving the group to navigate a labyrinth of stone and mist. These remnants suggested the presence of others who had struggled and sometimes failed, but the clues were fragmented, inconsistent, and dangerously misleading. The rescuers examined each artifact carefully, weighing it against their route and instincts, yet the evidence only reinforced the cliff's enigma. It was a place where human logic could falter, where survival depended on constant vigilance and the ability to read the subtle cues hidden in rock and shadow. One by one, members disappeared from view, swallowed by the cliff face as if the sheer wall itself had absorbed their presence, leaving no trace for those above. Calls echoed faintly, then dissolved into the wind. The ropes strained under load, and the boundary between solid rock and empty air blurred as rescuers moved along narrow projections. The fjord below seemed indifferent, reflecting light from above but hiding nothing of the drama unfolding on its vertical walls. The sense of watching an entire expedition vanish unfolded with chilling inevitability, and those who remained above could only grasp at fragments of movement and sound, fragments that offered no certainty of survival. Later reconstructions revealed only scattered equipment and disturbed rock formations, an incomplete puzzle that defied conventional explanation. Experts analysing the descent could map the route, trace anchor points, and account for many variables, yet the team's disappearance remained an anomaly. Every logical hypothesis seemed insufficient, leaving questions that technology and experience could not answer. Some fragments of rope were found on precarious ledges, and gloves were located far below where no climber could have easily fallen. The cliff had preserved hints of human presence while withholding the ultimate truth, guarding its secrets with an almost deliberate care. Even with modern mapping and climbing technology, Trollvegen's cliffs remained indifferent, shadows deepened, and the wind carried a whisper of unresolved fate across the fjord. The vertical expanse appeared unchanged by the tragedy, silent and unmoved, as if the events had never occurred. Rescue teams, climbers, and investigators could only speculate about what had transpired, yet the wall itself did not testify. The fjord below shimmered with reflective light, masking depths where answers might reside, leaving human understanding suspended between tangible evidence and impossible conjecture. Somewhere along those unyielding cliffs, the lost rescuers linger, suspended in a vertical void that neither time nor human effort can penetrate. The Himalayan Icefall Response, Nepal. The glacier groaned under shifting ice, its translucent crevasses reflecting the pale Himalayan sun, as a rescue team disappeared into the frozen labyrinth during a perilous mission. The icefall, a vertical maze of seracs and hidden fissures, had long been feared by climbers, yet its dangers became tragically real when those sent to help vanished without a clear explanation. Observers at base camp watched the team ascend, aware that each step carried the weight of thin air, unstable snow, and the mountain's unpredictable temperament. Even seasoned mountaineers understood that glaciers could change in moments, swallowing paths that existed only seconds before. The mission had been called after reports of stranded climbers, but the mountain itself seemed to turn the operation into a trap. Shadows stretched across crevices and ice towers, creating illusions that made distances deceptive and footholds treacherous. Equipment rattled as the team advanced cautiously, yet no one could foresee the silent hazards hidden under freshly formed snow. Each moment was measured against the unforgiving environment, where one misstep could vanish in the roar of collapsing ice. The tension was not just in the ascent, but in the knowledge that these frozen corridors had claimed lives before. When the first signs of trouble emerged, they were subtle. A snap of ice, a sudden gust funneling down a chute, a rope tugging against an unseen crevasse. Towering seracs loomed like frozen giants, casting elongated shadows over jagged crevasses that could swallow a person in an instant. Their massive, unstable columns shifted slightly, as though responding to invisible forces, making the team wary of lingering too long in one place. The ice fractured sunlight in dizzying patterns, complicating depth perception and confusing even the most experienced climbers. With each step, the glacier seemed to breathe around them, a slow, almost sentient movement that could not be predicted. Crevasses yawned beneath thin snow bridges, often invisible until one crossed too closely. The rescuers knew these were areas to avoid, yet the mission demanded they traverse them. Small avalanches tumbled without warning, sending sprays of ice into the chasms below. Even the sound of their own footsteps seemed amplified, echoing off ice walls that rose like cathedrals of frost. Danger was everywhere, yet the team pressed forward, trained to respond to uncertainty with methodical caution. Clad in layered thermal gear and tethered to reinforced ropes, the rescuers navigated the treacherous terrain with precision born of years on Himalayan slopes. Their movements were deliberate, each decision balancing speed with safety, a constant negotiation between urgency and caution. Anchors were tested repeatedly, carabiners checked, as the team advanced along unstable ridges. Radios crackled intermittently, providing faint comfort but little clarity since signals often died in the depths of the glacier. Ropes threaded through ice screws and pulleys formed lifelines, yet the shifting terrain could render them unreliable in an instant. Every member relied on instincts honed through countless expeditions. Despite expertise, the mountain's scale and cold imposed limits on even the most careful strategies. Each step required attention of mind, body and senses simultaneously, a dance with the glacier's invisible will. Cracks echoed through the ice as if the mountain itself were warning of impending peril, each fracture a whisper of the dangers below. Tiny fractures widened without notice, sometimes leading to violent collapses that could rearrange entire sections of the icefall. Observers noted subtle vibrations travelling through the glacier, a prelude to more catastrophic shifts. The team reported hearing these warnings in hushed tones, voices tight with tension and concentration. The glacier's movements were unpredictable. What had been stable in one moment could give way the next. Ice dust hung in the air after every snap, creating an eerie haze that distorted shapes and distances. Survival required constant vigilance and a readiness to retreat, yet retreat could itself be perilous. Each new crack carried both literal and metaphorical weight, as if the mountain were testing those who dared enter its frozen depths. A sudden whiteout obscured their path, snow and ice blending into an endless void, leaving the team disoriented and vulnerable. Visibility dropped to mere meters, and even pre-marked routes became invisible. Compasses provided guidance but offered little reassurance when the landscape appeared to dissolve into featureless white. Temperature dropped sharply, frosting equipment and stiffening limbs, making every maneuver slower and more laborious. The team had to rely on tactile and auditory cues, listening for groaning ice, feeling for subtle vibrations, and probing snow bridges cautiously before crossing. The wind carried ice crystals like tiny needles, stinging exposed areas and reducing morale. Each passing hour increased exposure, and yet the mission required pressing deeper into the unknown. Each decision became a calculated gamble against both the elements and the glacier's hidden traps. Anchors shifted underfoot, ropes creaked, and familiar ice formations seemed to vanish as the glacier's relentless motion reshaped the terrain. A previously stable serac tilted slightly, forcing a reroute along a narrower ledge. Snow bridges that had supported weight moments before gave way under careful testing. These minor setbacks accumulated, adding stress, fatigue, and doubt to already tense minds. Equipment once reliable became suspect. Every rope knot and carabiner was treated with suspicion. The mountain seemed to have its own rules, ignoring human logic entirely. Even seasoned climbers experienced a creeping unease as the terrain shifted beneath them. The familiar became strange and threatening, and every shadow was a potential hazard. Without warning, one rescuer was lost from view, the icefall claiming them in a silence broken only by distant groans of shifting glaciers. Attempts to signal or reach them were thwarted by vertical walls and hidden chasms. Panic was tempered by protocol, but fear was palpable. The remaining team members adjusted quickly, anchoring themselves and assessing the situation, knowing that one mistake could cost more lives. Echoes of calls returned distorted and faint, lost in the vast icy corridors. Rescue within the icefall required precision and timing that even the most experienced could not guarantee under these conditions. Searches along unstable ledges yielded only fleeting signs of passage, disturbed snow, a fragment of rope, but no trace of the vanished rescuers. Each crevasse examined seemed to lead to another dead end. The glacier appeared indifferent to their efforts, reshaping its surface and swallowing evidence. The rescuers could only record what they saw and move cautiously, aware that the icefall's scale made complete coverage impossible. Each moment of searching intensified anxiety and exhaustion. Scattered equipment and footprints that abruptly ended deep in the ice defied explanation, hinting at forces both human and unknowable at work. observers could not reconcile the distance between found items or the impossibility of certain routes taken. The glacier, shifting silently, concealed both the path and the fate of the lost team. Every attempt to interpret the signs led to more questions than answers, deepening the sense of a mystery embedded within the ice itself. Exhaustion, cold, and an overwhelming sense of the glacier's indifference pressed upon those who remained, leaving their minds restless and haunted. Sleep was impossible, and each hour stretched longer, filled with the unspoken fear of further loss. The mountain seemed aware, its every motion amplified by the silence and isolation. Human effort, skill, and courage met the glacier's indifference at every turn. Even as helicopters circled and teams descended, the icefall remained inscrutable, a frozen enigma that kept its secrets under shifting layers of ice. No map could capture its full complexity, no plan could account for its caprice. The mountain absorbed human effort without acknowledgement, a silent witness to tragedy and perseverance alike. The lost rescuer's fate lingers as a frozen puzzle hidden within the glacier's ever-changing walls. The Utah Slot Canyon Recovery, USA. The Utah Slot Canyon Recovery unfolded as a grim testament to nature's unpredictability, where even the most experienced search and rescue teams can fall victim to forces that seem to defy reason. In the arid expanse of southern Utah, narrow canyons cut through red sandstone, twisting and narrowing with sudden turns that create hidden chambers and echoing voids. These slot canyons are renowned for their beauty and their danger, a combination that lures hikers, photographers, and explorers, while challenging even the most skilled rescuers. During a particularly dry season, conditions seemed stable, yet a rescue team's attempt to retrieve stranded hikers ended in disaster. Initial reports described the canyon as secure. Meteorological data indicated no immediate threat of rainfall, and the team had completed routine assessments of the surrounding terrain before entering. They descended into the labyrinthine channels equipped with ropes, harnesses, and monitoring devices, confident in their experience and preparation. Slot canyons, while narrow and enclosed, are typically predictable in behavior during dry periods. Yet, despite this apparent stability, the canyon concealed hidden vulnerabilities that would prove fatal. The team's movements were carefully documented, their communication equipment functioning until the moment something inexplicable silenced it. Slot canyons in Utah are prone to flash floods, but those are usually preceded by detectable weather changes upstream. The team's supervisors relied on regional forecasts, which indicated clear skies for the foreseeable hours. The crew progressed into the canyon's narrowest sections, noting the unusual layering of rock and sand that marked areas where previous floods had surged violently. These layers suggested the canyon could carry more water than the surrounding terrain might imply, but the calculations were believed to be within safe limits. Even so, somewhere within those twisting chambers, conditions shifted in a way that no assessment had anticipated. The first signs of danger were subtle. A distant rumble, barely perceptible, echoed through the canyon walls, something that could easily be mistaken for shifting rock or wind. The rescuers, focused on their task, may have assumed the sound was part of the canyon's natural acoustics. Sand shifted along the canyon floor, and small pools of water began to ripple unexpectedly. Though they were technically trained to interpret these indicators, the canyon's geometry masked the true scale of the approaching hazard. By the time it became clear that a secondary flood event was imminent, escape routes were limited, constricted by the canyon's narrow passages and high, steep walls. Slot canyons often funnel water with extraordinary force, even from distant rainfall, and the team found themselves trapped in a section that magnified the flow. The water that arrived was not a slow trickle but a sudden surge, carrying sediment, debris, and the crushing force of accumulated runoff from miles of upstream terrain. Despite their harnesses and ropes, the rescuers were unable to stabilize themselves against the torrent. Their specialized vehicles and monitoring equipment offered no protection against the sudden velocity and volume of water that transformed the canyon into a lethal channel. The team's experience and preparation could not offset the canyon's unpredictable dynamics. Investigators later analyzed the canyon's historical patterns, revealing that this particular slot had experienced rare secondary floods decades earlier. These events occurred without direct rainfall in the immediate vicinity, triggered instead by distant storms funneling water through interconnected tributaries. In previous decades, hikers and small groups had been caught unaware, but a trained rescue team of professionals had never succumbed so completely. The anomalous nature of the event puzzled local authorities, as the canyon's design, while hazardous, had been considered navigable during dry seasons. The reality that a seasoned crew could perish under conditions deemed safe added a haunting dimension to the incident. Communication records indicate that the team's radio transmissions continued for some minutes after the first surge. Messages described rising water levels and rapidly deteriorating conditions, but the voices grew tense and fragmented as the canyon swallowed sound. Emergency commands attempted to redirect attention, but the canyon's twists and turns rendered guidance nearly impossible. By the time external rescuers reached the entry point, there was no trace of the crew save for scattered gear that suggested a violent struggle against forces they could not control. The efficiency of the team in preparation and protocol offered no explanation for the outcome. Search operations following the incident revealed the canyon's treacherous topology. Certain sections, obscured by overhanging sandstone and deep alcoves, had channeled water in unexpected directions. Areas considered refuges or escape routes were instead funnels that magnified the force of the flood. Equipment and personal effects recovered later were strewn across wide distances, often lodged in precarious formations where water had deposited them with immense pressure. Even with the visual evidence, investigators struggled to piece together the sequence of events, as the canyon's geometry masked much of what had occurred and left crucial details open to interpretation. The psychological impact on local rescuers and park officials was immediate. Slot canyons are familiar hazards, yet this event challenged their understanding of predictability and risk management. Experts noted that no known structural anomaly or miscalculation could fully account for the speed and intensity of the secondary flood. It remained unclear whether microgeological conditions, minor upstream precipitation, or an unpredictable interaction of natural forces had triggered the surge. The idea that a canyon could conceal such lethal potential in a seemingly benign environment created a lingering sense of unease among those tasked with ensuring the safety of visitors. Analysis of weather data, hydrological models, and historical flood events suggested that this was an extraordinary confluence of factors. Even computer simulations produced varying results, unable to precisely replicate the conditions that overtook the rescuers. The canyon's narrow chambers, layered sediments, and hidden tributaries formed a system capable of sudden, devastating force that could not be predicted with certainty. Experts acknowledged that, while the team's preparation was meticulous, the canyon itself had presented a variable beyond human control, emphasizing the limits of even the most advanced training and monitoring. The Utah Slot Canyon recovery became a case study in the unpredictable hazards of narrow canyon systems. It underscored the dangers of secondary flood events, particularly in regions where topography channels water from distant sources. The tragedy also highlighted the profound vulnerability of those who confront nature's extremes, demonstrating that experience and preparation cannot always counteract hidden risks. For years afterward, the canyon retained its reputation among outdoor enthusiasts as both mesmerizing and perilous, a place where beauty and danger coexist in stark contrast. Despite exhaustive investigation, detailed mapping, and analysis of weather patterns, the precise sequence that led to the team's demise remains unknown. The Indonesian volcano evacuation, Mount Merapi. The search and rescue team entered Mount Merapi with reports of stranded villagers, unaware that their mission would become a catastrophe no one could anticipate. Emergency alerts had come from communities on the volcano's lower slopes after a moderate eruption blanketed the region in ash. Trained for rapid response, the crew moved swiftly, their equipment checked and protocols rehearsed, yet even their preparation could not account for the subtle hazards that lie in the wake of a volcano's unpredictable behaviour. The air already carried the acrid tang of sulphur, signalling invisible dangers that would soon become overwhelmingly tangible. They moved with practiced precision, coordinating over radios and maps, while layers of ash and loose rock stretched before them like a challenge they were trained to overcome. Villagers had reported collapsed roofs and blocked roads, leaving pockets of people cut off from evacuation routes. Each crevice and ridge was measured against their experience, each step calculated to minimize exposure to potential collapse or heat. Yet Mount Merapi's slopes, though charted and observed for decades, retained the capacity to alter conditions in moments. transforming seemingly routine operations into exercises in survival. A subtle tremor underfoot hinted at forces beyond measurement, an invisible warning that the volcano's behavior could shift in an instant. The rescuers paused to assess vibration and ash dispersion, knowing that such microsignals often preceded larger, more dangerous events. For the untrained observer, the ground's quiver might have seemed inconsequential, but the crew recognized it as a faint signal of the volcano's restless interior. Even minor movements in such terrain can presage the violent surge of pyroclastic flows or the collapse of unstable slopes. Even their careful assessments failed to reveal the hidden instability beneath the hardened lava, where deep fissures and ash pockets concealed sudden collapse. Each step required balancing on layers of cooled magma that could crumble without warning. In some areas, ash had accumulated over older volcanic debris, creating deceptive solidity. The rescuers' maps and prior reconnaissance offered guidance, yet the terrain resisted certainty, reminding them that the environment itself was an active participant in the unfolding events. Without warning, the pyroclastic flow surged in a new direction, racing across the slopes faster than anyone could react. The air heated abruptly, carrying a mixture of smoke, ash, and volcanic gases that obscured vision and choked lungs. The team scrambled for higher ground, their training providing a brief advantage against an overwhelmingly hostile force. Even with ropes and harnesses, the speed and volume of the surge left little room for strategic maneuvering. Observers at a distance could only watch as the cloud of debris moved with relentless intensity. The rescuers struggled to breathe in the choking ash, their eyes stinging as searing heat pressed against every exposed inch of skin. Protective masks filtered some particulates, yet the combination of smoke and superheated air overwhelmed the senses. Every movement was slowed by the suffocating environment, while their radios crackled with fragmented updates. The chaos compounded as terrain features they relied on shifted or disappeared under new deposits of molten rock and collapsing slopes. Survival became a matter of immediate instinct, leaving even meticulous training insufficient against the volcano's force. Command teams at a safe distance followed their progress on instruments, only to find radio communications faltering and movement abruptly ceasing. Attempts to re-establish contact met with static and intermittent signals, while satellite images revealed ash clouds masking details of the slopes. Rescue coordinators grappled with incomplete information, analysing erratic shifts in the pyroclastic cloud to infer the crew's position. The combination of speed, opacity and heat left external teams unable to anticipate the flow's path or the precise hazards engulfing the rescuers. Scattered equipment and molten-stained footprints painted a story of panic, yet the ultimate fate of the crew remained hidden beneath layers of molten rock and hardened ash. Helmets, ropes and personal devices were found partially buried, sometimes wedged in fissures or lodged atop unstable slopes. Each artifact hinted at a desperate effort to navigate the changing terrain, yet the sequence of events could not be fully reconstructed. For investigators, these fragments provided evidence without explanation, emphasizing the incomprehensible nature of the disaster. Experts later analyzed wind patterns and topography, concluding that minor environmental shifts could have redirected flows unpredictably, though nothing fully accounted for the team's disappearance. Small variations in wind speed or the collapse of a ridge could accelerate pyroclastic surges or alter their trajectory in ways that human foresight could not anticipate. Even high-resolution satellite data failed to capture the microdynamics of ash and debris, leaving room for only partial understanding. The unpredictability of these forces created a scenario where training, skill and experience offered no guaranteed protection. Families and fellow rescuers were left with unanswered questions, confronting the unnerving possibility that even the most trained teams could succumb to the volcano's sudden violence. Communities familiar with Merapi's eruptions struggled to reconcile their knowledge of volcanic behavior with the disappearance of professionals. Emotional shock intertwined with operational frustration as colleagues attempted to assess whether additional human error contributed or if the mountain itself had simply chosen its moment of lethal unpredictability. The uncertainty amplified the tragedy, leaving all involved suspended between grief and disbelief. Despite comprehensive surveys and satellite monitoring, the events inside those deadly slopes could not be reconstructed with certainty, leaving the tragedy shrouded in mystery. Every observation, Every artifact and every measurement only confirmed the harsh reality that Mount Merapi's forces could overwhelm even the most prepared and skilled humans. The volcano retained its capacity to surprise, reminding investigators and survivors alike that natural power often operates beyond human comprehension. Mount Merapi kept its truth hidden, a silent force indifferent to preparation, skill, or human intention. The Canadian Ice Road Extraction, Northwest Territories. A sudden cracking echoed across the frozen lake, sharp enough to make even seasoned drivers pause, hinting at a hidden hazard beneath the seemingly solid ice. The search and rescue team had been dispatched to assist motorists stranded along a remote ice road, a network of frozen lakes and rivers spanning vast stretches of the Northwest Territories. Conditions had appeared routine: stable ice thickness, clear visibility, and well-mapped routes. Yet the lake held secrets invisible to every instrument and unseen by every trained eye, a quiet danger that would transform the operation from a controlled extraction into a mystery that baffled experts. Temperatures had remained unusually mild for the season, and subtle melt patterns created thin patches that experts knew could not be detected from the surface. Historical records suggested that ice in this region should have been reliably solid, yet local reports hinted at early thawing in unexpected areas. Rescue crews relied on standard testing procedures, measuring ice depth with augers and monitoring the surface for cracks or water seepage. Despite these precautions, the interplay of mild weather, water currents, and natural ice stress created vulnerabilities that lay hidden beneath the snow, invisible to both equipment and intuition. Currents moving silently under the ice weakened entire stretches without leaving any visible warning. Rivers and lake inlets flowed beneath a frozen crust, carrying water that undermined the ice's apparent solidity. Even minor changes in flow could erode structural integrity, producing weak zones where the ice might collapse under even moderate weight. The rescuers, unaware of these invisible forces, moved methodically along the road, trusting both their instruments and the repeated inspections conducted by previous maintenance teams. Nothing on the surface betrayed the danger that had been quietly spreading below. Wind cut across the flat expanse, carrying a silence so complete that every snap of timber or shifting snow felt like a signal of imminent danger. The vast openness amplified every sound, and the team became acutely aware of the subtle creaks and groans of ice under pressure. Even small temperature variations caused minute expansions or contractions, producing tension along the frozen surface. In such isolation, with no shelter or immediate backup nearby, the combination of environmental subtlety and extreme distance heightened the sense that something unseen might be ready to strike without warning. Vehicles ahead dipped unexpectedly, wheels pressing through sections that had appeared firm only moments before. The ice did not break completely at first, but the gradual give in its surface sent immediate concern through the crew. Their specialized vehicles, designed for travel on frozen lakes, were heavy and capable, yet the uneven support beneath their treads produced tension and anxiety. Every cautious maneuver was now complicated by uncertainty, and what had been a straightforward rescue route turned into a hazardous corridor where any miscalculation could prove fatal. Safety protocols were immediately enacted, yet the ice betrayed even the most careful maneuvering with unpredictable creaks and quivers. Ropes and anchors were deployed where possible, and vehicles attempted to redistribute weight to firmer sections of ice. The team communicated constantly, calling out observations and measurements, but the surface itself was inconsistent, alternating between rigid support and treacherous softness. Even with every precaution, the environment's hidden currents and subtle melting patterns undermined their efforts, demonstrating that no human preparation could entirely counteract nature's quiet, calculated unpredictability. Radio signals flickered intermittently, leaving nearby stations with fragmented updates that painted an incomplete picture of the unfolding crisis. Command teams relied on patchy communications to track vehicle positions and assess potential hazards, but the isolation of the ice road amplified every delay and interference. Observers attempted to triangulate signals, yet static and occasional silence left gaps in the narrative of events. The combination of distance, weather conditions, and the unpredictable movement of the ice meant that those monitoring could only guess at the exact status of the rescue crew, intensifying the suspense. Scattered equipment and fractured vehicle parts told a story of sudden struggle, frozen in place where the ice had given way. Augers, shovels, and communication devices were recovered partially submerged or tilted at impossible angles, suggesting frantic attempts to maintain stability or escape. Footprints ended abruptly in sections of ice that no longer supported weight. Every piece of recovered material provided insight into the crew's movements, but no definitive answers about their fate. The evidence hinted at struggle and miscalculation, yet also emphasized the role of the environment itself as an impartial lethal force. Ice engineers later observed that unusual current patterns, combined with slight temperature fluctuations, could explain the rapid collapse of surfaces that normally held firm. Subtle anomalies in water movement, coupled with areas of weaker snow compaction, produced stress points invisible from above. Models indicated that small, undetectable variations could create sudden, catastrophic failure, transforming previously safe terrain into a trap. Investigators concluded that while standard testing and protocol reduced risk, the convergence of natural forces created conditions beyond human prediction or control. Even the most meticulous preparation could not account for the hidden complexity of the ice road's behaviour. Colleagues and local authorities grappled with the impossible reality that a fully trained crew had disappeared in conditions that had been declared safe. Psychological and operational stress compounded as rescue teams attempted to map the incident and determine the timeline of events. Experts considered both human factors and environmental anomalies, yet neither fully explained how experienced rescuers, equipped with knowledge and specialized tools, could be overtaken so completely. The combination of isolation, deceptive terrain, and unseen currents left investigators and communities unsettled, unsure whether the tragedy was an accident, an unavoidable consequence of environmental complexity, or something more enigmatic. The ice stretched endlessly across the horizon, indifferent and silent, hiding the full truth of what had occurred on its surface. Despite meticulous analysis, satellite monitoring, and detailed environmental study, no single factor could account entirely for the team's disappearance. Each piece of evidence provided hints without clarity, reinforcing the unsettling idea that even the most controlled operations can be undone by forces beyond human understanding. The frozen expanse itself seemed to absorb the event into its vast stillness, a silent witness to a mystery that refused to be unraveled. What had seemed like an ordinary frozen expanse concealed a lethal intelligence, leaving no trace of the team except the haunting question of how solid ground could betray them so completely. The Bavarian Forest Mission, Germany. Fog settled unevenly over the forest floor, swallowing paths and contours in a way that made direction almost meaningless. The rescue team had been called to locate a missing hiker, yet even as they moved with methodical precision, the forest seemed to shift around them. Each step became a negotiation with uneven terrain and hidden obstacles, and the thick mist distorted familiar landmarks into unfamiliar shapes. What had appeared on maps as straightforward trails was suddenly confounding, and the dense canopy muted sunlight, making the forest feel enclosed and disorienting. Reports of the missing hiker had drawn the rescuers deep into the labyrinth of towering firs and shadowed valleys, each step measured against a history of misleading terrain. The Bavarian forest is known for its dense undergrowth, steep slopes, and interwoven ridges, features that challenge even experienced searchers. GPS coordinates provided a rough guide, yet even modern technology struggled under the thick canopy where signals could falter and electronic devices offered incomplete information. The forest's natural complexity seemed magnified that day, turning a routine operation into an uncertain endeavour. Uneven ground and hidden depressions concealed themselves beneath layers of moss and fallen leaves, creating traps that defied prediction. Even trained eyes could not immediately recognize a concealed root-filled pit or a shallow water-filled depression covered by decomposing vegetation. Each step carried a quiet risk. One misjudged footfall could twist an ankle, dislodge a branch, or trigger a slide into deeper unseen hollows. The rescuers' careful movements, while precise, were not enough to neutralize the forest's subtle, ever-present threats. Light filtered through dense branches in shifting patterns, momentarily revealing glimpses of open space before plunging the rescuers back into gloom. Shadows stretched and receded in ways that challenged perception, and familiar tree trunks seemed to appear in different locations with each glance. Even brief exposure to the shifting light created a sense of instability, a subtle unease that weighed on attention and slowed reaction times. The rescuers were confronted by an environment where certainty was fleeting and every visual cue required scrutiny. Signals from radios flickered sporadically, the forest interfering in ways that made it impossible to locate the source reliably. Attempts to triangulate positions were met with static and distorted reception, leaving distant coordinators with fragmentary and often contradictory updates. The team could only report intermittent readings, and each burst of communication carried more questions than answers. The forest's density and the undulating terrain combined to conceal movements, creating a tension that was both technical and psychological in nature. Branches bent and snapped under the weight that seemed negligible, a quiet reminder of the forest's deceptive complexity. Fallen timber, hidden roots, and weakened soil made even seemingly solid ground treacherous. Small slips or the misplacement of a boot could cascade into deeper instability, forcing rapid adjustments and careful recalibration of every movement. The rescuers, skilled and alert, navigated these hazards continuously, yet the forest imposed its own rules, subtle and unpredictable, beyond the reach of training or prior experience. From distant observation posts, coordinators attempted to guide the team, only to find maps and instruments inadequate against the forest's shifting perspective. Contours and ridgelines that appeared on maps as simple reference points were often misleading in person, their slopes obscured by vegetation or fog. Attempts to provide external guidance relied on guesswork, and every suggestion carried uncertainty. The forest seemed to resist clarity, imposing an environment where human judgment and experience could falter despite meticulous planning. Personal gear and scattered markers hinted at careful movement, yet no trail explained where the rescuers had vanished. Shovels leaned against trunks, radio cases lay partially hidden under leaves, and boot prints ended abruptly in areas that offered no clues to continuation. These artifacts suggested deliberate, controlled action in the face of danger, but their arrangement could not tell the full story. The forest retained its secrets, absorbing evidence into its thick foliage, leaving only fragments for investigators to interpret. Experts noted microclimates within the forest that could produce sudden fog banks, hidden water channels, and unstable soil, any of which might confound even a trained crew. Minor differences in moisture, sun exposure, or wind could render paths that appeared navigable suddenly impassable. These conditions, while mundane individually, combined to form a complex environment where small variations had outsized effects. Analytical models suggested that under certain circumstances, visibility, footing, and orientation could deteriorate so rapidly that even experienced rescuers might lose situational awareness. Colleagues and local authorities struggled with the incomprehensible disappearance, trying to reconcile professional experience with a forest that seemed to resist explanation. Searches over days yielded only partial clues, with no clear sequence of events and no explanation for the sudden cessation of communication. The combination of dense vegetation, uneven terrain, and intermittent fog had conspired to obscure movements and complicate reconstruction. Those familiar with the forest were left with an unsettling realization. Expertise and preparation offered no immunity from the forest's inscrutable tendencies. Even with thorough investigation, surveys, and historical knowledge of the area, the forest retained an impenetrable veil over the team's final movements. Detailed mapping, satellite imagery, and terrain analysis could identify potential hazards, but nothing could reconstruct the precise moments leading to the crew's disappearance. The forest absorbed the event into its shadows, maintaining its silence and leaving investigators with fragments of a story they could only partially infer. Each recovered object, footprint, or radio transmission only deepened the enigma, reinforcing the idea that some forces resist human comprehension. The Bavarian forest held its secrets in silence, leaving only the unsettling certainty that some missions are never meant to be completed. The South African Mine Rescue, Free State Province. Darkness stretched uninterrupted through the mine's corridors, a silent tension resting over the tunnels where the rescue team would soon disappear. The operation had begun as a routine extraction, responding to a minor collapse in one of the deeper shafts. On the surface, all indicators suggested normalcy. Ventilation systems were active, gas detectors registered within safe limits, and structural inspections had cleared every area the team would traverse. Yet underground, in the labyrinth of shafts, galleries, and maintenance tunnels, Even the most controlled environment carried hidden hazards that no preparation could fully neutralize. Their mission involved checking ventilation shafts and locating trapped miners, a task undertaken with the highest levels of training and specialized equipment. Every member of the crew was familiar with the intricate layout of the mine, having completed repeated drills in similar conditions. Helmets, lamps, gas monitors, and communication devices were all standard issue, and protocols for emergencies were practiced exhaustively. The team's expertise was unquestionable, yet the environment itself presented a subtle challenge. Confined spaces, uneven surfaces, and narrow passages that amplified both sound and silence. Faint vibrations travelled through the rock, barely perceptible but enough to make seasoned rescuers pause and note the anomaly. These tremors were inconsistent, fleeting, and not immediately alarming, but they served as a reminder that the mine was a living structure, subject to the stresses of geology and human activity alike. The floor beneath their feet seemed steady, but subterranean forces moved invisibly, capable of undermining even the most secure paths. Awareness sharpened, the rescuers pressed forward cautiously, aware that minor anomalies could escalate with terrifying speed. Shadows warped along jagged walls, and echoes distorted every sound, making distance and direction almost impossible to judge. Lamp beams cast elongated shapes that shifted as workers moved, creating optical illusions that obscured holes, debris, and other hazards. The tunnel's geometry amplified certain noises while swallowing others, so the faint click of tools or scuff of boots could not be reliably located. Within this disorienting environment, perception became both a tool and a trap, demanding constant attention and testing the limits of human sensory judgment. Gas monitors blinked intermittently, their readings fluctuating within acceptable parameters, but suggesting subtle changes that no one could fully explain. Tiny variations in oxygen, carbon dioxide, or methane levels were recorded but remained below alarm thresholds, creating unease without immediate danger. The team continued forward, aware that the very air around them could harbour invisible threats. The fluctuation of readings, while minor, introduced uncertainty into an operation otherwise guided by procedure, subtly undermining confidence as the journey into the deeper galleries progressed. The team moved cautiously, deploying emergency protocols and checking structural supports, yet the mine's labyrinth seemed to resist predictability. Cracked timber supports and minor rock shifts were examined and reinforced, but these inspections revealed nothing that should have made the tunnels lethal. Every precaution appeared sufficient, yet the mine's interior betrayed no consistency between expectation and reality. Even the smallest creak or shift became a potential omen, intensifying the tension as the rescuers pressed onward through passages that seemed deceptively secure. From the surface, coordinators tracked equipment signals, but the network of tunnels interfered, leaving only fragmented glimpses of the team's progress. Instruments relayed partial data, sometimes pausing for minutes at a time, creating a patchwork understanding of the operation. Surface teams could guess at the crew's location, but each signal drop, each delayed update, amplified uncertainty. Attempts to guide the rescuers were hampered by this technological distortion, reinforcing the idea that, despite preparation and communication, the mine maintained its own silent authority over the unfolding events. Personal gear, safety helmets, and clipped radios were later found in positions indicating careful maneuvering, yet they offered no insight into the final moments. Tools were neatly stacked near inspection points, helmets rested atop beams, and radios lay on the floor as if temporarily set aside. Nothing suggested panic or error. These artifacts implied a methodical progression through the tunnels and a disciplined adherence to protocol, yet they provided no clue to the exact sequence of events that led to the team's disappearance. The mine had consumed the story, leaving only fragments. Experts analysed airflow, gas circulation, and structural integrity, confirming that all systems had functioned nominally, deepening the mystery of the sudden fatalities. Ventilation shafts operated within design specifications, support beams were secure, and environmental readings were within normal ranges. Mine engineers and safety inspectors were confounded. There was no apparent failure, no detectable event that could have caused the deaths. The juxtaposition of a fully operational monitored mine and the complete loss of a trained rescue crew amplified the enigma, suggesting forces or occurrences beyond conventional explanation. colleagues and local authorities faced the impossible, balancing procedural investigation with disbelief at how a trained crew could vanish in conditions considered secure. Interviews, debriefings, and internal reviews provided detailed accounts of the team's movements, yet none offered definitive insight into the moment of catastrophe. Every witness account and piece of recovered documentation confirmed rigorous adherence to protocol. The absence of a clear cause left investigators with frustration and unease, as every fact only deepened the sense that the mine's interior held secrets inaccessible to both observation and analysis. Exhaustive mapping, surveillance, and forensic reconstruction revealed little, as the mine maintained its impenetrable veil, concealing the truth of what had occurred within its silent depths. Every angle was measured, every gallery examined, yet no sequence of events fully accounted for the team's fate. The labyrinth of tunnels, shafts, and ventilation ducts preserved its mystery, as though the mine itself had swallowed knowledge of the incident. Each attempt at reconstruction merely highlighted the complexity of the environment and the stark limitation of human understanding when confronted with the unseen forces underground. Within the winding tunnels and controlled systems, an unseen force had intervened, leaving only the echo of a mission that should never have failed. The Icelandic lava field search. Reykjanes Peninsula. A harsh, blackened expanse shimmered under the pale sky, its fractured surface hiding unseen perils that would claim the lives of the search team. The operation had been deemed straightforward: navigate the newly cooled lava flows near Reykjanes and locate missing hikers reported to have ventured into unstable terrain after minor volcanic activity. On the surface, meteorological reports suggested calm winds, and geologists had marked zones considered secure. Yet, the lava field was deceptively capricious, an alien landscape that seemed stable while concealing fissures, vents, and gas pockets capable of sudden lethality. Their task was precise: to navigate the recently formed lava flows and locate individuals trapped or disoriented after volcanic activity. Each rescuer carried heat-resistant clothing, portable gas detectors, and navigation instruments calibrated for rugged, uneven terrain. Their expertise was unquestioned. Many had participated in previous volcanic operations across Iceland. The field itself, however, refused to conform to expectations, its brittle crust and jagged surfaces challenging every step. Even the smallest miscalculation could plunge a person into a hidden void or trap them in a noxious cloud of gas. Beneath seemingly solid surfaces, brittle rock concealed hidden voids, and every step carried the risk of collapse into unseen chasms. Layers of rapidly cooled lava often formed hollow pockets where molten flow had once shifted unpredictably. Crevices wide enough to trap a boot could be concealed under a veneer of solidified rock. The rescuers moved with careful precision, tapping surfaces with poles and scanning for irregularities, yet the ground refused to reveal all of its dangers. Each step demanded vigilance, as the line between safety and catastrophe was thinner than the surface crust they walked upon. Steam hissed from vents, and pockets of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide shifted unpredictably, filling depressions with invisible danger. Gas concentrations that were imperceptible one moment could swell in seconds, triggered by minor shifts in wind or temperature. Instruments registered readings that fluctuated unexpectedly, offering a warning too late or intermittently, creating uncertainty for even the most experienced team members. Awareness of these hazards weighed heavily, yet they continued, driven by the responsibility to find the missing and the confidence in their preparation. Glimmering surfaces reflected light in deceptive ways, creating illusions of flat ground where sharp ridges or molten remnants lurked. The sun bounced off basaltic glass, throwing mirage-like patterns that distorted perception. Paths that appeared navigable concealed brittle protrusions and jagged edges, while shadowed depressions masked steaming vents. Navigators adjusted continuously, relying on both instruments and instinct to interpret the shifting visual field. Even the slightest error could send a rescuer tumbling into a fissure, turning what appeared routine into a deadly encounter. Radio transmissions cut in and out across jagged terrain, distorted by layers of rock and ionized air, leaving guidance uncertain. Surface coordinators received fragments of conversation, moments of clarity punctuated by static and delay. Calls for verification, updates on locations, or warnings about visible hazards were often muffled or lost entirely. This interference created a layer of isolation, as each rescuer relied on personal observation and training rather than the reassurance of continuous oversight. Uncertainty became tangible, an invisible companion moving silently through the lava field with the team. The rescuers proceeded with meticulous care, testing every ledge and crevice, yet some threats remained imperceptible to both eyes and instruments. Their progress was deliberate. Each footfall was calculated, each handhold examined. Even so, microclimates formed between fissures, unseen steam vents released toxic gases, and thin crusts of lava concealed sudden drops. The field obeyed no pattern recognizable from maps or prior reconnaissance. It was at once familiar and alien, a landscape governed by forces too subtle for even the most sophisticated instruments to detect reliably. Tools and personal equipment were later recovered near fissures and gas vents, positioned as if work had been interrupted by an abrupt, unseen event. Helmets rested atop fractured basalt. Gas monitors blinked where they had been last adjusted, and personal radios were still clipped to belts. Nothing indicated panic or disarray. The scene suggested that the team had been progressing cautiously, methodically, yet some force or circumstance intervened without warning, leaving only traces of disciplined movement and an absence that instruments could not explain. Volcanologists and geologists noted sudden shifts in localized gas concentrations and minor ground instability, factors that could easily overwhelm even experienced personnel. While all readings remained within historically documented variations, microbursts of sulfur dioxide or carbon dioxide, combined with small collapses of fragile lava crust, could incapacitate an individual almost instantly. Experts confirmed that the field's natural processes were ongoing and largely predictable, yet the precise interaction of these factors at the moment of the team's disappearance remained unknowable. On the surface, authorities confronted disbelief, piecing together timelines that seemed impossible given the crew's expertise and preparation. Detailed logs of instrument readings, prior mission training, and previous reconnaissance painted a picture of caution and competence. Interviews with colleagues highlighted meticulous planning and adherence to safety protocols. Yet the outcome defied explanation. A fully equipped, trained, and vigilant rescue team had been overtaken in a terrain that had been studied and monitored, leaving no clear account of the moment catastrophe struck. Surveying the terrain in detail revealed patterns of movement and disturbance, yet the exact sequence of events leading to the team's disappearance remained elusive. Footprints stopped abruptly near fissures, gas detector alarms showed intermittent spikes, and small items of gear lay scattered across precarious ledges. Reconstruction offered clues to their path, but not to their fate. The lava field, both open and treacherous, retained its secrets, refusing to yield the story of what had unfolded among its blackened ridges and hidden vents. The lava field retained its indifference, swallowing knowledge and leaving only the shadow of a mission that vanished without a trace. The Colorado Backcountry Extraction, Rocky Mountains, USA. A routine extraction in the Colorado backcountry was already slipping into uncertainty, with early reports hinting at conditions that defied all prior forecasts. Dispatchers had relayed that hikers were stranded after an unanticipated snowstorm had made access routes impassable, and a highly trained helicopter crew had been mobilized to reach them. Everything appeared manageable at first. Weather reports were nominal, terrain assessments indicated a navigable route, and the extraction plan had been reviewed multiple times. Yet something imperceptible lingered in the mountain air, a hidden variable that would turn an organized operation into a tragedy that left questions without answers. Every pilot and responder had logged years of high-altitude operations, meticulously reviewing topography, flight paths, and contingency protocols before setting out into the alpine air. Their training included vertical maneuvers near cliffs, rapid adjustments to sudden weather shifts, and extraction under extreme conditions. They were aware of the Rocky Mountains' reputation for abrupt changes, but their experience and preparation lent confidence. Still, the reports from the field hinted at a subtle anomaly, conditions that had been considered safe only moments before the mission's commencement. Vertical cliffs and narrow ridgelines carved the landscape into a labyrinth where hidden gullies and snow-filled depressions threatened even the most cautious maneuvers. As the helicopter approached, the crew had to calculate every angle of descent, every hover near a precarious edge, and each rotor adjustment with exact precision. One misjudged gust could result in rotor contact with rock, or a loss of lift could send the craft sliding along the mountainside. On paper, the path had been viable, yet in practice, unseen forces were at work that could overwhelm the most skilled operators. Invisible downdrafts and sudden thermals rose from sun-warmed rock faces, ready to seize control of rotor blades without warning. These micro-weather events, virtually impossible to predict with standard instruments, created turbulence pockets capable of tilting a helicopter in seconds. While meteorologists had issued a benign forecast, the Rocky Mountains' complex terrain generated rapid vertical air movements that even seasoned pilots could not anticipate fully. The crew was navigating a dynamic atmosphere, one that could flip from calm to deadly in a heartbeat. Patches of drifting clouds warped perception, creating the illusion of solid landing zones that might vanish in a heartbeat. Snowbanks and rocky ledges appeared deceptively uniform from above, yet some surfaces concealed hidden inclines or overhangs. The pilots had to interpret shadows, colour shifts, and subtle terrain cues to identify safe approach points. Misreading these optical distortions could mean contact with jagged outcroppings or unstable snow, with no time to correct once the rotor wash met turbulent currents. Radios crackled sporadically, their signals fractured by the peaks, leaving moments of isolation in which decisions had to be made without confirmation or guidance. Communication with base was intermittent, broken by topography and the interference of microstorms. At times, crucial information about wind shifts or extraction zones failed to reach the cockpit, forcing the team to rely entirely on instinct, prior training, and split-second judgment. In such moments, the thin margin between success and disaster became dangerously apparent. The team relied on precise adjustments, scanning the terrain, measuring altitudes, and calibrating movements to counter the unpredictable influence of the mountain's vertical air currents. Each hover, each descent, each extraction attempt was a delicate dance of coordination, physics, and intuition. Even with careful preparation, however, subtle atmospheric forces remained invisible to instruments and eyes alike, their presence detectable only in the briefest fluctuations of rotor vibration or a sudden pitch in the craft's attitude. Black box recordings later revealed abrupt shifts in lift and angle, micro-weather events that had emerged without a forecast, overwhelming both aircraft and crew in an instant. The logs captured moments of sudden vertical displacement, rotor corrections too small and too late, and audio spikes that hinted at the crew's awareness of a rapidly escalating hazard. Yet the data did not explain why these micro-events had occurred simultaneously in a manner lethal to experienced professionals, leaving a haunting gap in understanding. Wreckage lay scattered along the ridges, instruments still attached and gear meticulously positioned, a silent testimony to a mission carried out with careful discipline yet undone by unseen forces. Items recovered included harnesses, navigation aids, and flight instruments, none of which suggested negligence or error. The scene conveyed that the crew had executed the operation with exacting attention to procedure, yet the mountain itself had asserted a force beyond calculation. The careful choreography of training met an invisible adversary, leaving only remnants and questions. Meteorologists and aeronautical engineers studied wind patterns and turbulence, acknowledging that even controlled conditions could conceal sudden, lethal anomalies. The Rocky Mountains, they noted, can create microclimates and thermals that do not register on regional weather models, phenomena capable of overturning expectations and overwhelming any conventional safety measures. Analyses of the site suggested that a combination of air currents, elevation shifts, and rapidly changing thermal pockets could have created the precise conditions that proved fatal. Still, the precise sequence that claimed the crew remained speculative. Efforts to reconstruct the sequence of events highlighted skill, planning, and caution, yet could not explain how a team so trained had been overtaken in moments. Time-stamped records, radio fragments, and witness accounts of distant observers allowed experts to infer parts of the flight path, but the decisive moment of disaster remained obscured. The extraction had proceeded as planned until invisible forces intervened, leaving only wreckage and the unanswerable question of why an operation so thoroughly prepared had ended so abruptly. Among the jagged ridges and hidden currents, the backcountry retained its secrets, leaving only the echo of a mission that vanished before it could be understood. The Philippine Typhoon Retrieval, Luzon. Reports had come in of civilians trapped in rising waters when a seasoned search and rescue team ventured into the flooded streets of Luzon, only to disappear under conditions that initially seemed manageable. Early storm warnings had indicated heavy rainfall and localized flooding, but nothing suggested the rapid, lethal surges that would overtake the operation. The team was composed of experienced personnel, familiar with tropical storms and the challenges of urban and rural water rescues, yet the situation unfolded in ways no training could fully prepare them for. Observers later noted that the area's topography, with its low-lying plains and winding river channels, amplified the storm's effects in ways that were almost imperceptible until it was too late. The operation required precise coordination, with teams moving along inundated roads, shallow rivers turned torrents, and impassable fields where currents shifted unpredictably. Rescue units had to split, some attending to stranded families in low-lying villages, others navigating flood-swollen tributaries to reach isolated farmhouses. Time was critical. Even a short delay could allow water levels to rise several meters, rendering streets and bridges impassable. Teams carried inflatable boats, rope lines, and emergency supplies, each item carefully checked before the storm hit deployment. Despite careful planning, conditions shifted faster than forecast models could account for, creating a tense rhythm of urgency punctuated by moments of fragile calm. Debris-laden waters carried everything from uprooted trees to sections of buildings, creating hazards that transformed familiar streets into ever-changing obstacles. The team had to avoid collisions with floating objects while keeping track of civilians who had sought refuge on rooftops or small elevated platforms. The unpredictability of debris flow meant that even a seemingly wide channel could constrict without warning, funneling water with intensified force. Bridges that were believed safe moments earlier could collapse under the pressure, while submerged cables and poles presented additional hidden dangers. The rescuers' expertise was continuously tested as they read the water's subtle cues, attempting to anticipate the invisible forces beneath the surface. Meteorologists later noted that the storm surge had shifted direction unexpectedly, redirecting floodwaters into areas previously considered safe for evacuation. Rainfall upstream caused tributaries to backflow, overwhelming containment structures and sending torrents into residential streets. Flood forecasts had accounted for average water levels, but localized anomalies, enhanced by urban drainage and terrain gradients, produced sudden torrents that exceeded all predictions. For the rescue teams in the field, these shifts arrived without warning, leaving little opportunity to alter course or retreat. The water itself seemed to move deliberately, carving new channels, swallowing roads, and forcing rapid reassessment of every movement. Visibility was severely compromised as murky waters concealed submerged ditches, broken structures, and unstable surfaces, forcing rescuers to navigate almost entirely by instinct and memory. Rain blurred the horizon, and the overcast sky reduced contrast, making it difficult to judge depth or detect hazards. Flash floods sometimes masked their own onset, with waves appearing deceptively gradual before intensifying. The team relied on subtle cues, the sound of water rushing against obstacles, the slight change in flow around debris, the tension on ropes, to guide their navigation. Each misjudgment carried a heightened risk, as the boundary between stable footing and complete submersion was thinner than ever before. Communication faltered under the typhoon's relentless force, with radios cutting out, signals bouncing unpredictably, and multiple units struggling to maintain contact with command centers. Intermittent coverage made coordination nearly impossible, forcing field teams to make autonomous decisions while remaining in constant awareness of shifting danger zones. Backup satellite phones and signal repeaters mitigated some interruptions, but the sheer power of the storm's interference ensured gaps in reporting. For hours, units operated almost in isolation, their judgment tested by rapidly changing conditions, unknown obstacles, and the faint hope of locating civilians while preserving their own safety. The crew adjusted constantly, coordinating small teams, timing movements with perceived lulls in the surge, and continually evaluating risks that could escalate in moments. Some units maneuvered through narrow waterways, balancing the craft against current pressures, while others coordinated manual evacuations from rooftops or vehicles stranded in deep water. Plans required flexibility, improvisation, and a constant awareness of the storm's behavior. Even the most cautious procedures could be rendered ineffective by a sudden rise in water or the unexpected collapse of a barrier. The rhythm of the operation became a sequence of near-instant decisions, each one a delicate negotiation with forces that could not be controlled. Eyewitness accounts and subsequent mapping indicated sudden swell reversals and unexpected whirlpools that overtook sections of the rescue operation before any warning could reach the team. Floodwaters shifted in patterns that did not match meteorological predictions, creating small but lethal vortices in streets and channels. Equipment left in place suggested the rescuers were executing their tasks with skill, yet, in some cases, these whirlpools overtook personnel in moments. Later analysis suggested that urban terrain, combined with accumulated debris and rapid rainfall, produced micro-flood events capable of isolating teams within seconds, a phenomenon difficult to predict even with extensive experience. Evidence recovered after the water subsided included carefully positioned equipment and untouched personal gear, a silent record of disciplined operation despite the lethal chaos surrounding them. Boats were tethered, ropes coiled, and flotation devices still secured, indicating that the team had followed protocol meticulously. Vehicles and other mobile assets were found in locations suggesting purposeful deployment rather than panic. The absence of signs of struggle highlighted that the crew had faced a force beyond human error, an unpredictable surge that defied any standard tactical response. Hydrologists and disaster management specialists analysed the patterns, acknowledging that even precise forecasting could not account for localised surges intensified by urban waterways and debris obstruction. They concluded that the interaction between natural topography and human structures can amplify water velocity and redirect flows unexpectedly. The typhoon's impact combined multiple variables: rainfall volume, river backflows, tidal influence along the coast, and the sudden collapse of weak levees. In such circumstances, even the most trained professionals could find themselves overtaken by conditions that appeared only moments before to be manageable. All attempts to reconstruct the moment of disaster emphasized planning, skill, and vigilance, yet could not explain how a team so experienced had been swept away in moments of apparent calm. Analysis of timelines, eyewitness statements, and topographical mapping highlighted the precision of their operation, yet revealed no error or negligence. The combination of rapid water shifts, hidden debris, and urban hydrodynamics created an environment in which even the most careful efforts could be neutralized almost instantaneously. The team's disappearance remained a haunting reminder of the storm's unpredictable power, leaving investigators and survivors alike with unanswerable questions. When the floodwaters finally receded, only the empty streets and the echo of a vanished rescue remained, leaving a mystery that no current could resolve. The Patagonian Cliff Recovery, Torres del Paine, Chile. A team of experienced alpine rescuers set out to retrieve fallen climbers from the vertical cliffs of Torres del Paine, only to vanish under conditions that initially appeared secure. The mountains had been approached countless times by both climbers and rescue personnel, yet the unforgiving terrain of the Patagonian Andes offered dangers that were subtle, invisible, and lethal in equal measure. The operation began with careful coordination, maps and photographs reviewed, anchor points plotted, and contingencies considered for sudden weather shifts or rock instability. Local guides warned of the cliff's unpredictable nature, but even their expertise could not anticipate the lethal events that unfolded. Their mission demanded meticulous planning, as sheer rock faces rose hundreds of meters above remote valleys and unpredictable gusts threatened every step. The team had to navigate both vertical and overhanging sections, balancing the tension of ropes with the pull of gravity. Each movement required precise timing and assessment of stone quality, since even slight misjudgment could destabilize a surface previously deemed secure. The rescuers' knowledge of alpine climbing techniques was extensive, yet the cliff's remote location meant that any misstep could quickly escalate into a catastrophe beyond immediate control. Beneath a canopy of shifting clouds, the cliffs revealed hazards invisible to even trained eyes: overhanging ledges, fractured rock, and subtle fissures that could give way without warning. What appeared stable could be undermined by months of freeze-thaw cycles or slow erosive processes hidden deep within the granite. Observers later noted that the cliff faces seemed almost alive, shifting imperceptibly as if reacting to the wind and weight of the rescuers themselves. The team proceeded with caution, aware that the mountain's threats were as silent as they were deadly. Gear was carefully checked and anchored, ropes threaded through secure points, and each anchor placement measured against the known geological composition of the Patagonian granite. Carabiners, slings, and protection devices were meticulously inspected, and every rope knot was double-checked. The crew relied on decades of alpine experience, combining knowledge of rock physics with practical climbing technique. Even so, the most sophisticated equipment could not mitigate the subtle, sudden shifts in stone that would ultimately prove fatal. The descent required precision as rescuers navigated narrow ledges, rappelled across exposed faces, and balanced against the constant pull of gravity and wind. Each step demanded full concentration. Miscalculating the placement of a foot or hand could trigger a cascade of rock or a loss of balance that no rope alone could prevent. The team maintained strict communication, calling out each maneuver and verifying stability at every interval. Despite this, the cliff's vast scale and hidden irregularities meant that even small errors in judgment could have catastrophic consequences. Microfractures hidden within the stone began to reveal themselves as small, almost imperceptible shifts, sending loose rocks tumbling and reminding the team that the cliffs had their own unpredictable rhythm. These minor movements were subtle enough to be almost invisible to the naked eye, yet they accumulated over time, weakening ledges and anchor points. The rescuers had learned to read these signs instinctively, but the frequency and scale of shifts that day exceeded anything they had previously encountered. It became evident that the cliffs themselves were changing beneath their hands, a silent hazard that defied conventional alpine caution. Weather added another layer of danger. Sudden gusts and rapidly falling temperatures challenged every movement, slowing progress and eroding the margin for error. The Patagonian wind is notorious for sudden bursts strong enough to destabilize climbers, and the team had to adjust constantly, bracing against the gusts, while maintaining delicate control over ropes and anchors. Cloud cover obscured the sun and reduced depth perception, making it harder to judge distances across exposed sections. Even moments that seemed calm were deceptive, as the cliffs could release sudden gusts or shifting stones without warning. In a critical moment, overhanging sections that had seemed stable fractured without sound, toppling sections of rock and creating a deadly cascade that could have caught even the most vigilant rescuer. The debris moved with speed and unpredictability, striking areas previously deemed safe and forcing survivors to retreat or cling to the cliff face. Investigators later reconstructed the likely sequence of events, noting that microfractures combined with stress from the team's weight and environmental factors to produce sudden failures that no precaution could have entirely prevented. After the operation, investigators found ropes taut, anchors intact, and equipment meticulously arranged, not indicate misjudgment or procedural failure. Gear placement suggested that every protocol had been followed, yet the fatalities could not be explained through error or negligence. Each rope, knot, and anchor told the story of careful, deliberate action, leaving only the stark realization that forces beyond human perception had claimed the team. The mountain had shifted in ways imperceptible until they were overcome. Geologists and alpine safety experts later examined the cliffs, confirming that a minor, imperceptible geological shift had likely precipitated the disaster, leaving no trace of warning. Freeze-thaw cycles, erosion, and internal stress lines within the granite created conditions that made parts of the cliff inherently unstable despite appearances of solidity. Even high-resolution monitoring could not detect the precise timing or location of these shifts, illustrating how the natural environment can outmatch even the most skilled human intervention. Every reconstruction emphasized that skill and preparation alone could not counter the sudden, invisible forces lurking within the Patagonian granite, which had claimed the lives of those who knew the cliffs best. Analyses of anchor points, rope tension, and team positioning confirmed meticulous procedure, leaving investigators and colleagues with the haunting conclusion that the mountain itself had orchestrated the tragedy. Experience, caution, and expertise were insufficient against an imperceptible change that occurred in the blink of an eye. The granite faces of Torres del Paine remained unyielding, silent witnesses to a recovery that dissolved into the stone, leaving only an unanswerable void.